Hello, hello. This is Taylor Ursula of That's So Pisces, and it's time to talk about Leo season. So let's dive in, shall we? I am Taylor Ursula of That's So Pisces, and Leo season is a doozy. So let's begin. The heat of Leo season is on. Are you feeling it? I'm feeling it. It is hot and dry in these streets. Okay. It is rough out here. Things that you know are happening. Hello, hello. This is Taylor Ursula of That's So Pisces, and y'all, Leo season is the one to watch. So let's dive in, okay? Woo! Okay, so Leo season starts off with a freaking bang, all right? And we know that Leo season tends to do this anyway, all right? If y'all know Leos, if y'all love Leos, you know Leos are the bang. Okay, so Leo season is typically, for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, the peak of summer. And this one in particular will not disappoint. Let's talk about why. So if you've been here for a minute, you have heard me talk a lot about the shifting of the nodes and Venus retrograde and Pluto squaring the nodes. If you've watched my moon videos, you may have heard me talk about the Cancer new moon that we just had leading up to the beginning of Leo season, and how this lunation in particular was taking place on the day that the nodes were changing signs, and that new moon in Cancer also squared those nodes. So now that we've recapped some of what we've been building up to, let's talk about how it's happening now. So hours after the sun enters Leo on Saturday, the 22nd, we have Pluto entering into its first square with the nodes. You may have heard me talk about how Pluto will be in this entangled square with the nodes 3 times over the course of a week. This is all happening within the first week of Leo season. Not only is Pluto entangled with the nodes starting on this day, but this is also the day that Venus stations retrograde. We've been talking about it for weeks. We've been feeling some of the burn. Venus is hanging out in a hot, dry sign, not loving it, not really thriving, kind of burning up a bit, kind of feeling a little bit alone, kind of feeling like I've got to take charge of things for myself. Maybe we have been feeling some of our relationships reach a point of strain. Maybe we are having to advocate for ourselves in our relationships with others somehow. This all becomes very interesting because Venus, stationing retrograde on the first day of Leo season, is being joined by the sun, which means that this retrograde period will be initiated by a sun that is at home in Leo and being ruled by that sun now. This whole time we've been feeling Venus in her shadow being ruled by the sun in Cancer, which has added a bit of emotion to this process in ways that we haven't been seeing because they are neighbor signs and we don't know what they're doing. So this whole time we've been feeling Venus build up to this retrograde. She's been ruled by the sun in Cancer, which has added a bit of nostalgia, and any of those lingering emotional wounds that we're still carrying and being informed by, those have all been feeding into Venus. Now that the sun is properly in its own sign and ruling Venus while she's moving retrograde, there's much more of a pure kind of fire energy to this retrograde. You may feel that what was building up in the Venus retrograde shadow is now reaching a place of catharsis on this first day of Leo season as Venus stations retrograde. At 28 degrees, Venus is going to make this way kind of back through the sign of Leo and will have a Venus cazimi, which I'll get to in a moment, and that will provide a lot of clarity about what the themes of this retrograde are bringing up to our attention and where we want to begin focusing on what's coming up for us. The very next day, Chiron stations retrograde at 19 degrees of Aries, and this may add even deeper layers to whatever is going on in the Leo journey, in the Leo part of our charts, where we are reviewing our connections, we are revisiting those themes of how we relate. And Chiron stationing retrograde in Aries may kind of add another layer to this journey. We may be revisited by some of those wounds that Chiron and Aries has been bringing up for us. We may be called to sit with those. This is when both of these bodies are moving their slowest. When bodies station is when they are their slowest. And so we're not moving. We're not doing things. We're not making things connect. We are slowing down. We're sitting with what's coming up. And so this may be a really potent weekend of where within the self we feel alienated, we feel unappreciated, we feel unseen, unheard, and we may just be called to sit with that, to get an understanding of how it's currently coloring our experience and get a sense of what we want to do with that information. Now, I know I just said that we're not doing anything with this information. We might just be sitting with it as it comes up. I should mention that on this same day, the 23rd, Sunday, is when Mercury squares Uranus. So take this with a grain of salt. We may be saying things, we may be learning new things, we may be expressing ourselves in new ways. Let's remember that Mercury is currently hanging out in Leo as well, and squaring Uranus from Taurus, which is a sign that Venus stationing retrograde is ruling. So it might be that as these stations occur in this slowness, it may be that something emerges from the depths of us that we weren't anticipating. It could be that new information about who we are and what we need right now is forcing its way into the forefront. Maybe some of y'all are taking actions. Maybe some of y'all are starting conversations. I've seen a lot of jokes already on Twitter about how everyone is going into Venus retrograde single, like we're just going to end all of our relationships so that we aren't kind of left feeling stranded partway through retrograde. I don't know if that's your game, but Mercury squaring Uranus in the midst of these retrograde stations certainly creates a level of potency and quickness that has not occurred in some time. It may even be that some of the revelations that come up to you during these stations across this weekend make some things very clear to you. Some of us may have the answers to some of what's been limiting us, holding us back, drying us out, making us feel kind of stranded in this heat. And we may feel compelled to make some sort of move. On the 25th, we have our second square between Pluto and the nodes. This time it's the nodes squaring Pluto. I mentioned in my previous video about the new moon in Cancer that why this is happening, both of these bodies are kind of moving retrograde. The nodes travel retrograde. However, every few days, every few weeks, the nodes will travel direct. So at the first square, Pluto is squaring the nodes, and at this second square on the 25th, it is the nodes squaring Pluto. Let's feel out some of the nuance between those. Pluto is a planet, has energy, and therefore kind of has tangible motivation. Pluto squaring the nodes may be bringing up for us where we relinquish power that we shouldn't, where we give way to the masses in Libra and deny ourselves our individuality. The node squaring Pluto might be bringing up more of our soul's direction and kind of confronting power outside of us. I want y'all to experience this though and let me know, because I'm hypothesizing as an astrologer here. This is big energy. This is something that I will be experiencing myself and paying attention to. So let me know how this ends up playing out. But do know that this is the second of 3 squares. We'll get to that third one in a moment. But this whole stretch of this first week of Leo season is absolutely challenging us to get in touch with our very core, our very deepest motivations, and bring those into understanding in a way that allows us to see the path that we are traveling more clearly. Something else that makes these nodes a little confusing right now is that Mars has just moved into Virgo as of a little over a week ago at the beginning of Leo season, and can no longer see the North Node. Mars has been ruling the South Node up until this nodal shift. And so Mars hanging out in Virgo can't see the North Node in Aries. However, Venus retrograde in Leo can see the Libra South Node, and in fact is actually sextiling that South Node from a place of retrograde. So we are able to see more of what we're letting go of than we are able to see what we're striving for or what we are sort of pushing toward. Something to keep in mind, especially because on the same day of this second Pluto nodal square, we have our first quarter moon in Scorpio at 2 degrees. Mars can see this moon. Mars, newly in Virgo, is sextile to this moon at 2 degrees. And so Mars is able to see what it is that we are sort of building in that first quarter moon, and is able to get a sense of perhaps what we need to activate at that time. So while Mars can't see the North Node, Mars can see this first quarter moon and can see what our efforts are leading up to at this time. This is also the first Scorpio lunation without the South Node. So 3 cheers for Scorpio. You graduated. So what we see growing in this Scorpio house at this first quarter moon may be something we haven't seen before because we've been in a place of deep purge for the past 18 months. Get a sense of what's growing in this space, or maybe able to grow in this space now that it's been kind of deeply cleansed of problematic Scorpio themes like obsession, compulsion, and power hunger. On Thursday the 27th, Mercury meets up with Venus in Leo, and then trines the North Node in Aries. So what I described a moment ago, where Mars can't see the North Node that it's ruling, but Venus can see the South Node that it's ruling, this is a little loophole in this configuration for the time being. Mercury trining the North Node is able to pass on messages that it picks up from Venus sextiling and ruling the South Node. Mercury's also ruling Mars, who's in Virgo. And so this may be a moment where some information becomes clear to us because Venus and Mars have been hanging out in the same sign for so long and never meeting. So there may be a passing of a note, if you think about it that way, where Mars, unable to see the North Node, is receiving direction from Mercury, who is able to see the North Node. So it's a long, kind of convoluted chain of command, but there is an opportunity for some sort of clarity of direction at this time. It's kind of a brief window, but if we look and we become conscious of what's happening, we can definitely get a sense, even just a little bit, of what Venus is releasing in the South Node and how that's connecting us towards this North Node newly in Aries. And then the very next day on the 28th, Mercury moves into Virgo. So Mercury at home in Virgo, also in exaltation in Virgo. This is a time where we are really able to get things done, really able to focus on the details and taking information that we've gathered and turning it into something tangible. The same day, we have our final Pluto nodal square. This is also the North Node that has just connected with Mercury. So we may, at this third square, have a clearer idea of what these squares are bringing up to our attention, what we need to be activating within ourselves in order to move through the world in a more authentic way. That is very much going to be the signature of Aries, hosting the North Node for this time. Our souls are going to be called toward more authentic expression, and Pluto squaring these nodes is certainly asking us where we give power away by holding back who we really are. We start off August with a full moon in Aquarius. This might be kind of a funky one. Saturn is currently off to sea, not only drifting in Pisces, but also retrograde for the summer. Saturn can't see the moon that it's ruling because it lives next door. And Saturn can't even see its ruler currently. It can by sign, but this sextile has separated weeks ago. So we are maybe a little bit out of touch in this moon or not really sure where the feelings we're feeling might actually be coming from. The highlight of this moon may be some of who we are and how we're showing up as individuals authentically, and how that's creating, supporting, or making us feel separate from our sense of community. While the moon itself is a little bit confusing, some of the aspects taking place on this day help explain. We have Mars in Virgo trine Jupiter. Jupiter's ruling Saturn, Saturn's ruling this moon. So there may be some feelings of our efforts finding opportunity, our attention to detail, opening up space for more pleasure. There may be more responsibility that we are asked to take on now. I see you doing really well with that, and here is some more I'd like to hand you. On the same day, Mercury in Virgo, ruling Mars, is opposite Saturn. So while Saturn's kind of drifting off in the ether, Mercury is locked into this feeling of confrontation. And if we think about the chain of command here, Mercury in Virgo is ruling Mars, and Mars is trining Jupiter, and Jupiter is ruling Saturn, and Saturn's ruling the moon. So there's kind of a lot of room here for some really interesting vibes. We had Mars oppose Saturn here a couple of weeks ago, and that brought much more of a standstill to our actions, to our efforts. Mercury opposing Saturn feels a bit more like we're trying to make plans and there's no way to make them the way we want to. That will impact what Mars is talking to Jupiter about, and ultimately what Jupiter's ruling Saturn for. That will impact what Mars is talking to Jupiter about, but we'll get into that further at the Aquarius full moon video. Now, the rest of the week is relatively quiet. We have a few days to sit with the feelings that come up at this Aquarius full moon. However, I want to let you know that in this week, starting on the 3rd, is when we are entering our next Mercury retrograde shadow. Now, Mercury won't station retrograde until the very first day of Virgo season. Interestingly, much like Venus didn't station retrograde until the very first day of Leo season. So we'll talk more about that next time, but just know that what starts to come up starting on the 3rd for the rest of Leo season is going to be par for the course for Mercury's retrograde through Virgo. Just know that things that emerge at this time, themes that become conscious, are going to be part of what we'll be navigating then. On Sunday the 6th, we have the Sun in Leo square Jupiter in Taurus. This may be an indication that we are ready to just grow bigger and beyond whatever came up at that full moon. We may be finding opportunity to express ourselves more robustly. We may be ready to show people how hot we feel we are. This is the time to really understand kind of how we see ourselves and how we want to see ourselves, maybe pushing for some recognition that we feel like we deserve. On Tuesday the 8th, we have our 3rd quarter moon in Taurus. Now, whatever you think you know about the moon in Taurus is going to be different at this 3rd quarter moon. I will save the juicy parts for the moon phase video, but I will tell you that this moon hits Uranus and is being ruled by Venus, who the next day squares Uranus. So just know that everything you think you know about this moon will be different. Just know that everything you think you feel at this moon is subject to change. This is the 2nd square between Venus and Uranus. The first took place over that 4th of July weekend. And so you may want to look back at that time and get a sense of what's being revisited by this Venus-Uranus square with Venus retrograde. So on the 9th, I mentioned Venus will square Uranus. This is also the day that Mercury will trine Jupiter. So the sun came through and squared Jupiter the other day. Now Mercury's coming in to trine Jupiter. These planets are a little antithetical, but what we get with these two planets in combination is an idea in Virgo that gets expanded, that gets made bigger, that gets grounded and made more sensual by Jupiter and Taurus. And so this is a time where we may be able to think big. We may be able to take something that we're working on now and think about what kind of value it has, what kind of pleasure it brings, and what kind of opportunity it might open up for us. Remembering too that this is a Mercury that is in its shadow. So whatever comes up at this trine will be revisited once Mercury is retrograde in just a few weeks. On Saturday the 12th, we have the Sun in Leo trining retrograde Chiron in Aries. This is a time of integration, especially since that third quarter moon in Taurus shocked us, electrified us, brought something new to the table. This integration may be long awaited, may be processing new parts of that old kind of aching wound in Aries and getting a sense of how it's led us to become who we are now in a more authentic way. It may also just feel triggering. It may feel like I'm being reminded of how I couldn't do this before. And if that's the case, I want you to give yourself a little space for that. I want you to give yourself a little bit of kindness and know that you are becoming who you are every day. That's especially a Sun in Leo sign. It's a very much like I'm getting there. I am building my way towards deeper authenticity now that I didn't get to have before. On the 13th, Sunday, we have our Venus cazimi. So this is the inferior cazimi. This is a cazimi that occurs when a planet is moving retrograde. And so this is where we are getting a sense of clarity. We are getting a sense of what this Venus retrograde cycle is bringing to our attention. We're getting a sense of what this period wants us to know about who we want to be, who we want to be with, how we want to connect with others, and what we value at this time in our chapter currently. On the 14th, Monday, we have Venus retrograde trine Chiron retrograde. Okay, so everything I mentioned before about the Sun in that trine to Chiron, they've all been talking to each other over this weekend, right? The Sun trined Chiron, and then the Sun met Venus, and now Venus is trining Chiron. So there's a larger conversation taking place across these several days that we are getting a sense of the Sun showing us who we are becoming, Venus showing us what we care about, and Chiron showing us how this connects to our baby selves, how this connects to our youngness, our youth self that couldn't have those things. So we may be getting some sort of closure or at least some sort of insight into this larger pattern that's been happening and just making sense of it for ourselves. Again, maybe it will bring up that trigger and let's neutralize that. Let's neutralize the idea of that being bad. And let's just recognize that every once in a while, we cyclically have to check in on where that wound still exists, how we've already addressed and dressed some of that wound, and where that wound currently needs attention now. When we don't check in with those things, we lose track of what actually ails us. And we may take on symptoms that aren't actually part of us anymore. We just remember them and recall them. And that's not healthy for us. That doesn't allow us to grow. So we want to take this time to sit with what comes up, to be gentle around what feels sensitive, and to just face it as best we can so that we can move forward, not continuing to compact that wound. On the 15th, it's the Sun's turn to square Uranus. So all of this integration that I just mentioned, all of this getting to know ourselves, getting to see what we've surpassed, getting to understand what's still within us that needs attention, this square to Uranus may be a big catalyst for going after that thing, for releasing some attachment to that wound. Uranus wants to break us out of what's holding us back, and it will do so in whatever means necessary. So this is a time where we may want to be careful about reactivity, about pushing what isn't working, because if we are trying to push for something that is not meant for us, Uranus will blow it up in some dramatic fashion. The next day, Wednesday the 16th, we have our new moon in Leo. This continues the track we've been on for several months now, where we have experienced a majority of the astrological season before we've made it to the new moon. And it makes the new moons kind of interesting. Since this is a new moon in Leo, it's being ruled by the sun in Leo, and the sun just met with Uranus. Maybe clashed, maybe confronted, maybe was caught off guard by. And so that's going to be woven into the fabric of this new moon in Leo. This is also the same day that Mars in Virgo trines Uranus in Taurus. And maybe there is something there about us integrating or being able to act on or toward whatever revelation emerged for us that day before. And on Saturday the 18th, the sun in Leo comes in to trine the North Node. So it seems that what is electrified by Uranus in this shakeup in the days prior is something that's putting us on a path that we need to be on. Again, Mars is ruling that North Node from Virgo, and so that trine to Uranus connects some of those downloads into our actions. And then the sun coming into trine the North Node gives us a little glimpse, a little bit of a vision into where this fresh node in Aries is calling us toward. So even though there's some disruption in that square, it does show us kind of the pieces falling into place in the days following. On Tuesday the 22nd, we have Venus retrograde in Leo, square Jupiter in Taurus. Remember that Venus is ruling that Jupiter, and therefore there is something that Venus is experiencing in Leo in this current retrograde cycle that is sort of being imparted upon that Jupiter while it's being squared. This first square took place on Sunday, June 11th. Okay, so I invite you to look back at that time to get a sense of what kind of themes were showing up for you there. We have talked a little bit about Jupiter and its sort of shadowy underbelly. And so Jupiter may arrive in this moment as too much of a good thing. There may be expectations that we want. There may be desires that we are pushing for. Now, whatever came up at the first square is, of course, I'll keep saying this word, being revisited here and in this current square since Venus is retrograde. So maybe something happened at that first square that we are reflecting on now, that we are being called to revisit, that we are being called to reframe in some way, and maybe get a deeper understanding into. On the same day, Mars in Virgo opposes Neptune in Pisces. We've been experiencing this transit every 2 years or so for some time. Neptune's been in Pisces for several years at this point, I believe 11 or 12 years now. And so Mars enters Virgo approximately every 2 years. It retrogrades, right? So we've been experiencing this for some time, every couple of years or so. And this brings up some sort of disappointment, devastation, frustration around all of our efforts that we are putting in. Remember that Mars in Virgo is hard at work on the details, is hard at work trying to make something theoretical, tangible, earthly, physical, real, palpable. And that Neptune in Pisces vibe is very much about the kind of falsities of perfection, the lie in the dream, the fantastical that can't really ever be real, and what lengths we will go to fight that. Neptune is a very creative energy, and it often helps us ground what can't otherwise be expressed. It is a signature of artistry, of film, music, poetry, etc. It is also a place where we delude ourselves, where we can't accept the truth, where we fall into gaslighting, where we gaslight ourselves. So Mars opposite Neptune is often very confounding, and it can be downright depressing. I don't want to trigger you. I just want to warn you that we can be overwhelmed by feelings of inadequacy or of never really reaching that thing we aspire for. So this day, considering the contrast of both of these energies, could be pretty overwhelming or confounding. we may have really big ideas about what we think is possible, and we may find that no matter what we try, we can't accomplish what we're envisioning. How this looks for you is going to depend on where these aspects are taking place in your personal chart. But we know Virgo is kind of a personal sign, and Pisces is a very universal sign, and oppositions are such that one planet is always below the horizon and one planet is always above it. So there's always some pervasive feeling of me versus the universe, me versus us, me versus you. There's a stare down, a confrontation there of something that we are capable of and something that is outside of us that we can't control. And on the 23rd is when the sun enters Virgo and Mercury stations retrograde. So it's, again, remembering that we've been under the shadow of Mercury's retrograde through Virgo for the majority of Leo season. It makes so much sense to me that Mercury is stationing retrograde just the day after this very kind of confounding, contradictory, maybe confrontational, maybe upsetting day. Mercury moving through its home sign and its sign of exaltation of Virgo, moving backwards for us to help us begin to reframe all of this. Maybe we need more information. Maybe we need to reroute our efforts. Maybe we need more help. We are going to find out more once we start to explore Virgo season. So stay tuned. We will dive into the tarot pulls for each sign, and we'll get a sense of what the cards have to say about this dramatic as always Leo season. Stay tuned. Okay, here is our tarot intro. Just a quick recap of the structure of how we pull for the monthly pulls. A little bit different than my weekly pulls. So if this is your first time checking out my month ahead, season-long tarot pull, then we are doing so underneath the kind of cards of the year. So the Chariot is the card for 2023, and this reflects the journey of integrating conscious and subconscious drives so that we are aware of what's steering the ship. And for Leo season, we are incorporating the sun, which is no doubt affiliated with Leo and is toward the end of the major arcana journey, in which we are seeing ourselves emerge as our true selves, seeing that inner light spark and feeling that faith that we are coming out renewed. So let's go ahead, click the timestamp in the description in the video, and it will take you directly to your sign. You can go ahead and read for your sun, your moon, your rising, whatever feels right. Take it, and whatever doesn't fit into your life in this moment, go ahead and leave it behind. Okay, let's get started. Okay, Leo, step right up. You are first on the docket, and it's time to talk about your month ahead. So all of this Venus retrograde material that we've been discussing, this is all happening front and center for you in your first house. Who you are, how you have shown up in the world, what's important to you, and how you reveal yourself to others. Yourselves, you may have multiple selves. How you reveal yourselves to others is all up for debate while Venus is retrograde in your first. And while she's here, she's ruling your third house of local and immediate environment, neighborhood, siblings, peers, the mind, as well as your 10th house of the legacy that you're creating while you're here, the career that you are currently building up to, and how people talk about you, your reputation. So those are spaces that will be reframed for you in some way. The node shifting, showing up, the south node in Libra showing up in your third house, the north node in Aries showing up in your 9th house, and this inviting you into perhaps more higher learning, perhaps more travel, perhaps taking in different cultures, studying a different religion, and letting go of those things in the third house, those neighborhood spaces, reframing connections with peers and siblings. And with these nodes in the 3rd and the 9th, they'll be squaring Pluto from the 6th, which is time, the body, routine. We have Mars in Virgo hanging out in your 2nd house, ruling that north node in the 3rd. And maybe you're thinking about what kind of skills you can use to travel more, what you can do for work, to be out in the world somehow, maybe even mass communicating. And that Mars-Saturn opposition that we've been talking about is taking place then from the 2nd to the 8th. So there's some sort of blockage regarding your resources and who gives them to you and how you acquire them, who you share those with. I'm thinking employer, landlord, ancestry. Okay. And lastly, we have Mercury hanging out in your 1st house, which is its house of joy. And when we enter Mercury retrograde shadow, it will be taking place in your 2nd. So more themes about how I acquire things, what skills and values I find important, and where they're getting me at this point in my life. We've got our trusty dice here, and we're going to go ahead and see what we've got in store for you. So I feel like I can't just cut from it sitting. I don't know what that is. That's a strange little thing, but here we go. And of course, thinking about all of this through the lens of the Chariot, what currently needs conscious, subconscious awareness and alignment, and how does this connect with how you see your inner light, how you see your true self? Okay. I'm like, I take the, all right. Okay, so let's see here. Themes showing up for you. This Leo season. Okay. Well, very interesting. There's certainly like some overlay here, even though the circles are in different places. We certainly have kind of similar themes. So this is kind of an interesting juxtaposition here. We've got these pentacles. 3 of Pentacles is about teamwork. That's making me think about your 3rd house. When we think about the 3 of Pentacles, we are coming together with others on a common goal. We want to build something tangible. Maybe we worry that we aren't smart or wise or knowledgeable enough to contribute. And yet in this card, we realize that it takes all kinds to contribute. It takes all levels of experience. It takes all different perspectives to bring us to a place of building collaboratively. So I'm thinking about this and your 3rd house, as well as the full moon in your 7th house. And maybe you're thinking about who your team is. I love the procession from the 3rd to the 7th. If we think about the 3rd house, I always think about school. It definitely does represent our school years. This is where we meet each other. This is where we enter preschool or kindergarten, that elementary setting where we just are submerged in each other's personalities and lives. And we're just kind of like pushing each other's buttons, pulling each other's hair, pushing each other on the playground, asking each other a million questions. And it's all to kind of understand more about ourselves through the lens of the people we are around and what our environment reflects back to us. In the 3rd house, I like to joke that in this sort of preschool elementary setting, you are telling me that you love Cookie Crisp, and I'm like, ew, I hate Cookie Crisp. And I'm like, I like Fruity Pebbles. And from there, from these sort of seemingly minute facts, this is where we start to build our preferences for who we want to spend time with one-on-one in the 7th house. If you like Cookie Crisp and I like Fruity Pebbles, we're not friends. And that's where the 7th house is also open enemies. And then I find the people who do like Fruity Pebbles, and then we find other things to continue bonding around. So this 3rd house, 7th house vibe of who are my teammates is a question that I'm getting. Especially if we're thinking about what we're building up to, and that feels a bit like it's reflected in the 9 of Pentacles. And I love thinking about the 9 of Pentacles as your Taurus 10th house, whether that's your midheaven, whether your midheaven's in a different house. whole sign's going to say 10th house is Taurus for you, and this feels very, well, even the North Node moving through Taurus and finishing up now, sort of trying to guide you to this place of what this ultimately looks like. And in a, in a certain way, you may feel like you're kind of on the bottom of this right now, and we'll get to that with death. But Venus retrograde, right? So reframing a lot of that, you might be looking at this and thinking, I was building something. I thought I was building something. I've been putting in the work to build something. It's maybe not looking like what I hoped. It's maybe not carrying the significance that it once did. So thinking about who we work with certainly does overlay into what your legacy looks like, what career might look like, and what kind of reputation you currently have. Are you with the people you want to be with? Are you showing up to the right team? Are you giving yourself enough credit as a team member? Are you critical of the team that you're a part of? These are all really good questions, and let's bring in some of these heavier cards here. We see death, and that's obviously a time of transformation. This makes me think of Scorpio, which is your 4th house, that very private space. That could be your IC, but it's definitely where this private space is. And with all of this activity happening from the 1st and the 10th, it makes a lot of sense that something else would have to kind of unravel opposite and square that in the 4th, right? And then we have a grand cross to that full moon in Aquarius in the 7th. So makes sense that with your other angles being lit up, something must maybe implode, something old is coming to an end, and you may feel a sense of, I don't know myself right now. That's what's mostly scary about death. It's not the literal prospect of something being over or losing something. It's the losing the sense of self in the process that scares us. And that brings me to the 5 of Cups. The sun comes with a particular journey. It doesn't just show up for us. It comes after the long night that we spend in the moon. And the moon is a place of our deepest unconscious, where we are so fearful of what lives in there. We don't really want to know. We want to try to avoid it. I often say we'll try to drive through it or past it, and it's the urge to rush past those kind of that unconscious material that can ruin us, that can wreck us, that can set us up for sabotage. So the sun emerges as a triumph, and I'm getting that same sense seeing the sun show up at the end of this tunnel as the light at the end, right? If you've heard me talk about the 5 before, I love to refer back to the Rider-Waite image, which is the cloaked figure looking down at 3 spilled cups, and there are 2 cups remaining behind. And so there's 2 calls of action in the 5 of Cups. The first is to honor that feeling of loss and mourning, because without it, we deny ourselves something human. But if we continue to linger on that pain, if we ignore the light that emerges on the other side of that tunnel, then we're just continuing our own suffering, right? So the second call of action is to recognize that light coming through and to be willing to follow it in the natural timing that you are able, right? But not holding yourself in that place of suffering, because that's not a way for us to process. So there's something coming to an end, I think, maybe deep within you, as something is changing on your surface, as all of these external parts of you are being highlighted and reviewed and brought to the surface. There's something within you that similarly, as above, so below, something within you also must kind of come to an end or must be reckoned with in some capacity. And maybe that comes with a bit of grief. Maybe we realize that we're not with the right team and we haven't been building toward the goal that actually matters to us. And we're in this place of mourning all of this. But that's okay, because our lives are changing. And when our lives change, it's hard to both mourn what we lack while also being scared of uprooting everything to welcome that in. But it is necessary to let this happen. So I love thinking about this for you. Let's go ahead and roll these dice. We've got Virgo, so I definitely see that kind of Mars action taking place and being really significant. Also that Mercury retrograde. And if this is, a team and my resources and how I am able to experience and celebrate them. Maybe you recognize that maybe it's work that is not the right workspace for you. Maybe your values are not being shared or honored by others in that second house. And Saturn opposite in that Pisces 8th house is telling you there's some blockage, or it's time to reconsider what that looks like for you. One is just pointing me to all the activity in your first house. And I'm seeing Venus here too, which of course makes me think that that Venus retrograde in your first house is going to be huge. It may be, you know, I'm thinking about it, and I think we've talked about this in some of my other videos preparing for this retrograde. I've described it as, you know, Leo is a dry, hot sign, and Venus likes it kind of damp. Venus likes it cool and damp, right? So in the sign of Leo, she's having a hot girl summer, but she's dehydrated, okay? She's sunburned, all right? And she is far away from some of the creature comforts that help her keep going. And so you can think about it as, what is it that Venus is enduring at this time? And in order to do that, in order to continue making this trek through this dry heat, something's got to give. Something's got to... something has to shift in a big way. And I think that Venus in the first is really going to be much more resolved to putting things down that don't help her on that path. I do a lot. I endure a lot. Do you drain me as well, or do you nourish me? And that may be a big part of kind of what gets considered in these pentacles, as well as what comes up for grief or destruction. But I think in the end, it's really a time to get clear on what you need where others aren't really able to give it, and putting yourself in a position where you're able to receive what it is that you are actually needing at this time. All right, Leo, thank you so much for tuning in. Please let me know in the comments how this lands for you. I am sending you hugs through the internet, and I hope that you have a really enlightening and like depth-altering time this season. I'm excited to see what new shifts open up for you. And if you enjoyed this, please go ahead and like it, share it, and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Okay, Virgo, step right up. Let's go ahead and talk about your month ahead. Now, when we talk about Leo season, we are looking at the sun moving through your 12th house. And this is where Venus has been hanging out for some time, and where Venus will station retrograde. All right, this 12th house is your house of the big picture, what it all adds up to: mental health, isolation, karma, endings. So this is the time of year where you are winding things down before you start your new year, Virgo season, next month. So this may be a slower time for you, and you might be thinking about kind of processing all that you've done for the past year and kind of making sense of what it all means to you before you start anew. And that means the full moon will be in your 6th house of time, body, routine, pets, things we're in service to. Okay. And while Venus is retrograde in your 12th house, she'll be ruling your 2nd house of my resources, my skills, my values, what I like, and what I do to earn it. And your 9th house of faraway travel, of other cultures, of higher learning and religion or philosophy. We have the North Node in Aries hanging out in your 8th house, putting the South Node in Libra in your 2nd house. And those are going to be squaring Pluto from your 5th house of children, of play, of love and affection, of gambling. And we have Mars hanging out in your 1st house of self, giving you gusto around what it is you are striving for. And that's going to be opposing Saturn in the 7th house of one-on-one relationships. And finally, your chart ruler, Mercury, is hanging out in your 12th house in Leo before moving into your first house, which is its house of joy, where it will prepare for the next Mercury retrograde in your first house. So we've got lots about your personal self up for debate. This Mercury retrograde that we're gearing up to in your first house will likely have you changing directions, changing the plan, getting new information or reviewing old information, and ultimately figuring out what that means for you and where you're going next. And there's certainly some themes of interpersonal conflict, perhaps, with this opposition from 1st to 7th. Where we're trying to go is being blocked by someone we are close with, someone we are married to, someone we work with, a friend, an enemy. Oh my. All right. And so this, this nodal journey happening on your 2nd and 8th house axis is certainly inviting you into deeper reflection around what's yours and what's shared. All right. So let's go ahead and pull some cards. And remembering that we are pulling these through the lens of the Chariot, our card for the year, helping us get a deeper understanding of where our conscious and unconscious energies need to find each other and be aligned. And this season's card, the Sun, showing us what it is to kind of find our inner light and to emerge fully knowing and seeing ourselves. Okay, so some themes coming up for you this Leo season. Okay, yeah. So we see a pause. That makes me think about Mars opposite Saturn for sure, and makes me think about Mars wanting to be hard at work and maybe needing to take the time to decide what it's investing in. Mars is going to spend the next 6 weeks here in your first house, and it will engage in you a deep energy, a deep drive. And yet, not only is Mars going to oppose Saturn, but this 10 of Wands here certainly tells me that you might be burned out. I'm thinking about the retrograde happening in your 12th house with Venus ruling that 2nd house and that 9th house, and maybe thinking about what it is that I am doing for money, what it is that I do for work, what it is that I consider to be my skills, and wondering if that still matters to me the way that it has. Again, Venus wrapping up a cycle in your 12th house, maybe thinking about, this has fulfilled its purpose. I have done this kind of work up until now. I have said that I am a person who does XYZ, and I was that person, and perhaps I am ready for some changes there. The 10 of Wands tells me that it's time to put something down, right? We've talked about the 10 of Wands before. If you've hung out with me, we've talked about how this 10 is different from other 10s. We don't reach the end in this 10. We reach a realization that our heart must go on. And that is, our passion continues beyond the physical, right? Our passion extends beyond the tangible. And so we are this kind of triangle. We've developed this base in order to be able to hold this flame, and yet doing so has drained us of something. And we're recognizing that we have to put something down in order to keep carrying that thing that we're passionate about. So it might be that it's time to delegate things. It might be time that it's time to end something. I'm going to say maybe that's the case, because I love seeing the beginning and the ending of a suit together in a reading. I'm thinking, especially since we have a page here too, which is a new beginning in the court sense, I'm thinking that you might be considering what it is that you do, what it is that you're emotionally tied to right now, and whether or not you really want to fully invest in that. There is room here for something new to begin if we choose to put something down. Not only is the idea there, and it may not be a new idea, but it may be time for it to ignite, if you will. And so it's not just the idea, but it's the resources are here too. Maybe something about, if I pause and I think about what I'm really doing here, I'll recognize that I need to put my energy elsewhere, or I need to maybe turn away from this square. Maybe I need to flow into this square because whatever's in this square is promising to help me kind of delegate some of this responsibility. And in doing so, I free up some space from the ether to create new opportunities, new potentials. Okay, let's roll these beautiful dice here and get a sense of what else we might need to know about this. But this makes a lot of sense for not only, as I said, Mercury preparing to retrograde in your first house at the end of the season, but Venus ruling your second house and about to station retrograde in your 12th house. There is something about where I'm going, first house, and where I've been, 12th house, and I'm finally putting together that I'm done with something, and this is changing where I want to go from here. We see Venus, okay, absolutely, and Taurus, which we think about as your 9th house. Okay, so maybe it's, okay. I'm getting a sense that it could be if I'm putting down a skill that no longer serves me or that no longer feels good to me, then I'm opening up to learn something new. Or if I put down something that I've been doing here, then it frees me up to travel somewhere in the 9th house. So there's something to be explored in that 9th house space that may be freed up once something is released in the 2nd house. And they don't see each other. That's kind of the trick with planets' domiciles. When planets rule 2 domicile spaces, they don't see each other. So you may be hesitating about something, not really understanding how putting something into motion will allow for something else to take place. That's kind of the trick with, again, those houses are in conjunct. Venus can see, well, Venus can see both of them actually from where she is. And maybe that's what is important about this retrograde in your 12th house, okay? Venus can see both of these houses that don't see each other. Venus from Leo in your 12th house can see your 2nd house. And in fact, I've mentioned before, Venus will be, when the nodes shift, they are in alignment with Venus having just stationed retrograde. So there is absolutely a conversation happening directly between those 2 bodies while Venus is also talking to that 9th house. And so Venus will know. Venus from the 12th, maybe a little mysterious, maybe there's some mystery to how these things end, or to having faith. That's a very 12th house theme, is like trusting my vision, even if nothing else out here is affirming this for me or like validating this. And so it might be that Venus is able to see all of this activity taking place and is able to say, yes, from out here, I'm wrapping things up and I'm understanding what's valuable to me moving forward. And so let's let some things fall away, or let's lean into the hesitation. If that's what it's looking like for you, it may otherwise be, if you've been hesitant to trust in investing in something because you're not sure of how it's going to play out, that may be important for you to sit with. So, I love thinking about this, kind of reflecting the sun, thinking about once the sun crosses into Virgo next season, you will kind of have seen everything in that subconscious space. Venus will be, past that cazimi where they've exchanged that information about what this retrograde really signifies for you. So I certainly see this leading you up to this point of, self-realization. Okay, we are getting to where I'm seeing myself more clearly. Okay. Thank you so much, Virgo. I appreciate your time, because you're a Virgo and time is precious. So if you enjoyed this, please give it a like, give it a share, give me a follow. Let me know in the comments how this lands for you. And I'm really excited to see what emerges for you on the other side of this cycle. So see you next time. Okay, Libra, welcome. Let's talk about your month ahead. So when we talk about Leo season, we're looking at the sun moving through your 11th house. of friends, communities, hopes and dreams for the future, grandchildren, and freedom. And that puts the full moon happening in Aquarius this month in your 5th house of children, affection, play, games, gambling. All right, and Venus, your chart ruler, will be retrograde in your 11th house and ruling your 1st house of self and how I move through the world, as well as your 8th houses of shared resources and who signs my paycheck and what contracts I'm part of. So those spaces will be up for debate in this retrograde time. We see the North Node in Aries hanging out in your 7th house of one-on-one relationships, be they romantic, business, or enemy, and the South Node traveling through your 1st house of, again, who I am and how I show up in the world. And those nodes are squaring Pluto from your 4th house of emotional body, family, origin, home. We have Mars in Virgo in your 12th house of deep subconscious, what it all adds up to in the end, karma, mental health, and that's going to be opposite Saturn in your 6th house of time, routine, and the body. And lastly, we have Mercury hanging out in your 11th house as well, and later preparing to retrograde in your 12th house by the end of the season. So let's get a look at what is in store for you this season and what we're going to be looking at for you. Okay. All right. And so thinking about all of these cards we're about to look at through the lens of the Chariot as well as the Sun. The Chariot, our card for the year, reminding us of what this season needs deeper reflection, alignment, what unconscious material within us needs to be made conscious so that we can integrate and move forward intelligently and instinctually. And the Sun, our card for the season, showing us emerging from a period of depth and unconscious reckoning in order to see ourselves in new light, in order to reconnect with our inner child and seeing our real selves transformed. So let's take a look. Okay, so some of the themes coming up for you this season, Libra. All right, we don't see any majors or any courts. Oh, I just lied to you. We have one court card here. Okay, cool. So there's not a whole lot of like overhaul happening for you. If you've looked on the internet, I feel like everyone has been apologizing to you, Libra. Everyone's like, all Libras must be sad because Venus is going to be retrograde. Okay, well, you know, fine. But also, it looks like your plate isn't too packed this month in terms of what that might look like. And that could be a sigh of relief. So we've got 2 7s here, which is kind of a fun little bookend here. Let's start with these 7s. What are they talking about? 7 of Pentacles talks about assessing. We are assessing where we are in this process. Okay, cool. Makes a lot of sense. Am I enjoying what I'm seeing grow? If we think about we're planting the seeds and then we, do our harvest, we do our check-ins, and we are taking a look to see if we like what is showing up. Are these seeds properly watered? Do they get enough light? Are they growing to the right size? Are they as tall as they should be? Etc. Are these strawberries juicy or are they sad, right? Okay, so makes a lot of sense to me, Libra, that you would be thinking about what is this adding up to right now? What does this look like for me? And so thinking too about maybe what's happening in that 8th house. How am I showing up in the world? Do I enjoy that? And am I seeing my bank account grow the way I need it to? Am I sharing resources with people in a way that feels functional and good? So we've got 2 pentacles happening here. It makes a lot of sense. We're looking at your tangible spaces, right? Your kind of tangible goods. So we're in a period of assessing. This 7 of Cups, on the other hand, is kind of asking this question of like, what do I see when I'm assessing? So I'm taking it all in. I'm taking a good look. I'm checking out all these strawberries. I'm making a list. I'm checking it twice. Okay, it's not even Christmas. I'm so sorry. I'm doing all of this kind of like tasking work, right? Okay, so that also feels very Mars and Virgo in your 12th house. I am behind the scenes for now, and I'm getting a sense of what it's all adding up to. So let me do some inventory. That's a very Mars, Virgo, 12th house feeling. I'm taking inventory from the year of what things look like. Are they growing well? Are they sustaining me? Are they feeling good? Okay, and so when we bring in the Seven of Cups that asks the question, what am I looking at? We are not only thinking about, is this growing the way that I like it, but we're also thinking about every other feeling we've ever had about everything we've ever grown. Is this what I want it to be? Is it growing into what it was that one time that I was really upset and devastated? Is it growing into what I think it's growing into, or is it growing into what I'm afraid of right now? How are my emotions impacting what's tangibly real in front of me, and like still in the process of growing? Okay, this is not the 10 of Pentacles and then we're asking like, okay, did it match up to your expectations? This is like, we're still in the process. It's still growing. So we may have a lot of feelings around like what we're looking at, and does that feel good? I'm scared. Okay, so it's really important to understand what we want to even be seeing in the first place. Okay, that's definitely like the question in the seven is like, what have you experienced in the past that could be coloring how you're seeing things now? And what are you seeing in the present that's not really allowing for what's possible in the future? Okay, that's what we need to remember with the seven. Again, we're not at the 10, we're not at the end. Okay, so aggressive. We're not at the end. We're getting to the end. Okay, maybe some of the fear that clouds what we're seeing is that we are getting near the end, and so we're kind of like worried, am I gonna get there? But we do need to remember that some of this is still in process. Maybe this is just a broader message about you being a work in progress, about Venus ruling you and being retrograde. We're just gonna need to kind of know like what we're even looking at first before we decide like whether it's amazing, if that makes sense. So thinking about the Five of Wands and the Knight of Pentacles, this five makes me think that we're competing for something. We are having to step up to the plate, and maybe that is why this assessment is so necessary, but also why it's triggering so many deep feelings. What if we are competing, or we're otherwise challenging something, or we're recognizing at the very least that there are others out there like us? Doesn't make me think like job market, this is kind of like the TikToks that we see where it's like, I applied for 100 jobs and like nothing is there. Like there could be very real, absolute real stress about like, am I getting where I need to be going? Because like, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one out here. I'm not the only one trying to dip into this fire. Like I need stuff too. So there's absolutely, very real reason for the feelings that are impacting or informing what it is that we are looking at right now. So I love seeing this Knight. This is making me think that if, based on the rest of this narrative that I have explored so far, that you are this Knight. I mean, that's what we tend to say if there's no other court cards in the reading either, like it reflects you. And so it feels very accurate that you might be someone who's like putting in that work this month to get what you want. So if this is not, let's say worst case scenario, this is not growing the way you want. And let's say all these feelings are valid. And let's say all these other competitors are very real as well. So this is you putting in that work to change that in some way. And I'm going to start rolling these. I'm going to start not rolling. I'm going to start, I can't even think of a word for this. All I can think of is shuffle, which is what I did with the cards. Okay, you know what? Whatever. We're going to roll some dice. So this is you. Like, I'm going to put the pedal to the metal, and like, based on what's happening, I'm going to make some shit happen. On the other hand, that's the worst case scenario, right? So let's say that's not quite the worst case scenario, and we are unsure of what we're seeing, and we're putting in this time to get clear on what emotions are kind of at the forefront of whatever we're seeing. Then this is still going to be kind of the same outcome is you deciding, well, I'm putting in the work now to get clear on what this is, and if I have been trying to grow something that is informed by an emotion that I actually don't really feel good about being informed by, then I'm going to put in that work to get clear on that, to kind of brush aside some of these emotional clouds or some of these, the mental swirl that we are, as humans, so good at just entrenching ourselves into. Okay, so we have the sun, thank you, so literal, and 7 and Gemini. Okay, so interesting. We talked about the North Node moving into your 7th house, and that could certainly be some of what this 7 is pointing out. And I'm also thinking about Gemini, which is your 9th house. I can visualize it, and I started saying different numbers. Your 9th house of travel, of the world and who I am in it, learning about myself. So that's kind of interesting. Self and who I am in the world. And of course, coming back to the sun, which is in your 11th house. So, interesting. We're kind of looking at social spaces. We're looking at how I express myself. We're looking at who I connect with. So maybe there's something here about who are these competitors? Or just this is where my mind went. Who are these other people who are kind of part of this equation, right? And who are you to them? Who are they to you? There's not other, I'm not seeing other people showing up here outside of this 5. And so it does kind of feel like okay. Coming back to that North Node in the 7th, I'm kind of thinking about, of course, the opposite then, that 1st house South Node. And you being asked about, what have I had to do on my own is the sense I'm getting. I was like, you're alone here. What's going on? And maybe that's part of the question. This looks like this because I've had to do it by myself. And because I've had to do it by myself, I've had XYZ feelings about my ability to do this. And so, am I the worker bee that I want to be? Am I a worker bee for what? Okay, so questions. All right. I think you're definitely looking at who you have had to be to get where you are now, and maybe what you're allowed to be free of. Let's come back to that 11th house, which is where Venus and the sun are. And Venus in the 11th, the sun in the 11th, they want to be free. There's a reason why I emphasized that in the beginning. They want to YOLO. And so if we've been bound to something that isn't really allowing us to thrive, isn't really allowing us to turn into the person we really want to be, then it's time to start getting clear on that and to start putting in that effort and that energy into what it would look like for you to begin to move down that path. Okay, and I love thinking about that in terms of these cards. We have the Chariot again, reminding us what is consciously, what we are consciously aware of and what we need to understand unconsciously within us in order to know why we're going the way we're going. If part of you has been asleep at the wheel, which, okay, South Node vibes, we have to lean into kind of the worst of the Libra traits. So all of that shadow stuff of Libra, where Libra shows up to please other people. Libra shows up to facilitate ease, but isn't actually being themselves or isn't actually feeling good. If you want to see yourself authentically, which let's keep in mind, the nodal journey will be 18 months. So this Leo season is not the bulk of it, right? It's just the tip, if you will. It's just the beginning. But I think there's a big pull for you to kind of excavate your real self from some of what you've had to be part of or endure in the past in order to be who you are now. And being okay with letting go of some of the parts of who you are now, knowing that you're not really losing yourself. You're losing the parts that you actually don't want to show up as anyway. So, thank you so much, Libra. If you enjoyed this, please give it a like, please share it, and go ahead and subscribe. I would love to hear how this lands for you in the comments. And I am really excited for you to kind of get clear on these walls of 7s, these kind of like funhouse mirrors of what's actually clouding what I'm looking at and what do I actually feel good about that I want to continue and what am I ready to stop doing. All right, I'll see you next season. Okay, Scorpio, step right up. It's time to talk about your Leo season. So when we talk about Leo season, we're looking at the sun moving through your 10th house of reputation, of your career, your legacy that you're creating in your life here. And that puts the full moon in Aquarius in your 4th house of home, of emotional body, of privacy, of origin. Now, Venus will be retrograde in your 10th house as well, and from there, she'll be ruling your 12th house of what it all means, how it all adds up in the end, of karma, of mental health, of isolation, as well as ruling your 7th house of one-on-one relationships, be they business, romantic, enemy, or friend. We'll talk about the nodal axis, and that's the North Node in Aries hanging out in your 6th house of time, routine, and the body. And opposite that, the South Node in Libra hanging out in that same 12th house, being ruled by Venus. And those nodes are going to square Pluto from your very, very mental, actively mental, I guess I mean mentally active, 3rd house of mind, immediate environment, siblings. Okay. We've got Mars and Virgo hanging out in your 11th house of hopes and dreams for the future, of friends and communities. And that's opposite Saturn in the 5th of children, of love and self-expression, as well as play. And lastly, we have Mercury in the 10th hanging out with the Sun, and then moving into the 11th, where it will begin to prepare for its next retrograde. Okay, let's pull some cards. And we will interpret these alongside the narrative we've been laying out with the Chariot this year, in terms of thinking about what's coming up for us to bring to the surface from the unconscious, so that we can integrate these things into our waking selves and move in alignment. As well as the Sun, which is the card for Leo season, which is showing us showing our real selves, showing us who we are on the inside, showing us that inner light that sometimes gets suppressed. So let's get a look at what we've got in store for you. Okay, Scorpio. Interesting. We've got 2 10s back to back, and they feel very, very juxtaposed. Okay. So let's talk about the 10 first, because I feel like we're looking at it like it's sort of the black hole amongst the rest of the reading. So let's just name it, all right, and figure out what we got here. The 10 of Swords is certainly an ending, and it's not a card that a lot of people love to see, but it does absolutely mean that something has finally come to an end. So maybe this is what the full moon is illuminating for you in your 4th house. I'm thinking about something old in the emotional body, something fear-based, because everything else around here looks really positive, okay? So I'm getting the sense that something has ended, is coming to an end, that's maybe long awaited, and it's just been kind of looming over you, feeling like a worst case scenario, and maybe something does culminate that doesn't feel great, but it does allow this situation to finally be over, okay? We get to be this light that's emerging from this crevice, from this like beautiful dark space, and we've had to go in there, right? Like we can't avoid this space, and if anything, we need to go into it in order to allow for closure. So there is something about closure for you this month, Scorpio, that's definitely connected to thinking patterns, right? Let's get into the swords a little bit. We've got thought patterns, we've got like just anxiety loops, okay? So something gets to end there, which I love for you, obviously. That's amazing. And so the rest of these cards then, I love seeing the 10 kind of next to this 10. There's something about home, perhaps. There's something about reaching a milestone. And I love to think about the 10 as us and other people. 10 is where we share this bounty with someone else. So I am kind of thinking literally about like this castle-y home, and maybe there being some sort of new development that takes place that allows you to feel really secure, really grounded, and that kind of going hand in hand. I mean, they're literally next to each other, so that kind of going hand in hand with this idea of something coming to an end. It may be that as this ends, you realize you're here, and that's a really beautiful place to be. because again, they feel like opposites. And if you've been living in this place for some time, then this is absolutely like a breath of fresh air and a huge relief. And I love the 6. This is a celebration. This could be for something that you've accomplished. Let's talk about all those planets hanging out in your 10th house of reputation and legacy and like my career and what I'm creating. So honestly, Venus could be up in the 10th house like, y'all better have my money, or like, y'all need to talk about the fact that I did this. But naturally, the sun, and we talked about the Venus cazimi, so that could be part of it too, kind of illuminating everything that you've been doing and giving people a chance to celebrate you, to talk about that. I love this King of Cups. It is pretty precious, and if there were other court cards, if there's another narrative here, maybe I would say that like someone comes in to kind of hold space for you emotionally. But I'm getting a sense, especially the longer I look at the kind of inversion of these lines, these triangles, I'm kind of thinking that like going into this darker place and liberating yourself from this thing that has felt looming or haunting. You know, Scorpio, you love your looming and your haunting. That this actually, like going through this is sort of a rite of passage that empowers this inversion of this energy outward. So it's almost like everything you've been through. I mean, even like, you know, I made this deck and even I'm discovering things for the first time. I'm like, this light is like totally the birth of this rainbow. So you having had to go through this sets you up to be this incredibly emotionally mature and giving person, which makes a lot of sense, obviously. The more we go through and actually process and reconcile for ourselves, the more we are actually able to transmute that experience into something beautiful, into something positive. And maybe that's something we're celebrating as well. Let's roll these dice and get a sense of what else we need to know. But I really enjoy seeing that this season, and let's tie in some of these South Node themes too, because the South Node's moving through your 12th house and is kind of sweeping out a lot of old debris. That's the house of mental health. If there's been something long awaiting you to clear it out, the South Node rather, coming through there and vacuuming may very well be the thing that you needed to really clear up space to step into this role. And the South Node is like a vacuum. It sucks away everything that's kind of, we're done with this. This has served its purpose. We're good. Okay, your chart ruler, Mars, is hanging out in Virgo in your 11th house. It's also opposite Saturn. So maybe there is something in those two houses that is part of this 10 of Swords. Perhaps there's something between our affectionate selves, our self-expression, our children, our play space, that is kind of holding back something from the 11th house of being free and that YOLO space. And perhaps that kind of catalyzes this event. But I'm also sensing that Mars up there in the 11th house may be kind of severing some ties and preparing you for a future that you haven't been able to move through because this has been here, because this has been kind of looming, kind of hanging out there. Let's look at Jupiter, who's ruling that Saturn and is doing so from your 7th house. So it might be that, are you playing this role for 7th house people? That's a very Jupiter vibe. I'm going to take responsibility, or I'm going to like be the hero kind of like, energy. I want to be the hero and be the one who holds space for people's feelings. Because look, I've been through it too. That's also a good place for celebration, right? Jupiter loves to be celebrated. And 3, okay, thinking about maybe your 3rd house, which is Capricorn, and that's where Pluto has been hanging out. It might be that, Pluto, yes, the Pluto square, okay, from that 3rd house. I said that was the mind, right? That nodal square to Pluto might be intense in terms of purging your unconscious spaces, right? The 3rd house is the house of the mind. The 12th house is kind of the mind in the ether space. And Pluto in the 3rd may have you thinking really deeply about what anxiety means to you, where it lives within you, what sort of neighborhood triggers exist that connect with this anxiety. And the North Node in your 6th house saying like, trust your body, trust in time right now. And the South Node releasing maybe something that's from even before this lifetime. If you are vibing with me, then you'll know that I love past lives. I love to talk about karma. And there may be something in that 12th house space that is really connected to that Pluto hanging out in the 3rd and this anxiety that's being kind of purged, okay? And this is Pluto wrapping up in the 3rd. Pluto's been in your 3rd for 16 years now. It's finally moving into your 4th in Aquarius. It did so earlier this year. It will again in January, but it will pass into this 3rd house space one more time for you, Scorpio, and that'll happen next spring. So what's coming up here really does need to be taken seriously and purged for you so that you can step into all this other bounty. And of course this aligns with these cards because we're talking about something deep within you, something within these kind of dark houses, this 12th house space dark house, this 4th house space dark house being illuminated by the full moon. And it makes sense that these are some of the things that we need to excavate and get clear on in order for you to really feel like you can shine the way that you need to out here. I know it's been rough for you, Scorpio, with the South Node in your 1st house for so long. Things are shifting. It's going to feel looser, and I'm really excited to see what this season brings out of you. So if you enjoyed this, please go ahead and give it a like. Please share it. Please subscribe. I would love to hear in the comments about how this is landing for you and what this connects with in your real life. And I'm so grateful to have you listen. So I'll see you next time. And thanks again. Welcome, Sagittarius. Step right up for your month ahead reading. All right, now as we are exploring Leo season, we're looking at the sun moving through your 9th house of foreign travel, of other cultures, of higher learning, religion, and philosophy. And that means that the full moon will be taking place in your 3rd house of local environment, neighborhood, peers, siblings, and the mind. We've got Venus stationing retrograde also in your 9th, and from there she's ruling your 11th houses of the future, hopes and dreams, collaborations, community, and friends, as well as the 6th house of health, body, and time, routine. We have the nodal axis hanging out across your 5th and 11th houses. So we've got the South Node in Libra hanging out in that 11th house we just described, which means the North Node in Aries is hanging out in your 5th house of affection, self-expression, and play. And those are going to be square to Pluto, who's retrograde, hanging out in your 2nd house of my resources, my values, and how I make my money. We've got Mars in Virgo hanging out in your 10th house of career, reputation, and legacy. And that's opposite Saturn in your 4th house of home, origin, family, and the emotional body. And lastly, we've got Mercury hanging out in your 9th as well and preparing to station retrograde in your 10th house. Okay, so let's go ahead and get a look at what we got going on here. Okay, and pulling these under the guidance of the Chariot, which is our card for the year, showing us where we need to align our conscious and unconscious motivations in order to steer with integrity. And this season's card, the Sun, which shows us emerging from a period of depth and uncertainty, arriving as our true selves, sort of seeing our inner light shine, and returning to ourselves. So let's see what the themes are that are showing up for you this season. Okay, that feels like a very Jupiter card. All right. Well, this is maybe a simpler time for you, Sagittarius. No majors, no court cards. So we're just dealing with kind of the everyday nitty-gritty of life. All right, so we've got the 9 of Cups here, which is really the farthest in the suit that we get in any of these cards. These two are very early cards, and this one's kind of hanging out in the middle of the suit. So
A lot of cups, a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions. You, Sag? No. Of course, so many feelings. All right, there's a lot that we are emoting this month, a lot that we are wanting to connect through others. Okay, so this 9 tells me that it's time to kind of to wish. To put it really simply, the 9 of Cups is kind of a wish card. That's making me think about how the sun is in your 9th, which is its house of joy. In traditional astrology, the sun loves to be in the 9th. 9 of Cups, we have 9s here. And so the 9th house for the sun is its house of joy because it is able to see the ascendant from there, and it's dealing with themes of the past. The 9th is sort of it's a cadent house. It's sort of dealing with what has been and kind of what we are deciding with what has been. And so the sun loves to be in the 9th, able to both deal with issues of the past, use what has happened, learn from it, create meaning, a very Sagittarian theme, and use that to see where the ascendant wants to go moving forward. This is also the house of foreign travel, culture. And I say foreign travel, I should maybe say far away travel. The 3rd house is more local travel. I'm commuting to my job. I'm going to the store. So the 9th house is kind of far away travel. I'm taking a big trip. So the sun loves the 9th house because it is able to put itself into all of these kind of broader situations, bigger than the self, and learn about what role the self plays in this bigger world, in these faraway places. Kind of gets to see the big picture of things and understand who I am in all of that. So this might be an opportunity for you to think about where you want to be, where you want to go moving forward. Once the sun is in your 10th house next season in Virgo, you'll be thinking about what kind of moves I have to make and who I want to be. And so at this time, you have this kind of nudge to be creative about what's next for you, about what you want. Okay. And that leads us right to the 2 of Wands, doesn't it? That's very natural. The 2 of Wands is absolutely in line with what we've just described. From the 9th house, if I can think about who I am and how I've moved through lots of different spaces, I can get a sense of where I want to go next, right? The 2 is where we are at the drawing board. We are making the decisions about what kind of plan we want to make for ourselves and how we will start to kind of move toward it. In the 3 of Wands is when we actually start to walk that path. So in the 2 is where we are setting it up, is where we are deciding the stops. To kind of make it a tour analogy, we could think about like, this is me sitting down and thinking about all the places that I will go. And then once we reach the 3 is where we get to travel. Some of the motivation for these decisions that you're called to make may be about who I want to connect with. What kind of people do I want to be around? And this actually feels very connected to the full moon in your 3rd. The moon is in its joy in the 3rd. The moon loves to be connected with its immediate environment, loves to be a reflection of what's going on in the neighborhood, loves to connect people. So this season for you is when the sun and the moon are in their houses of joy, and that may really light you up about what's possible. So we're thinking about who we want to connect with. Who are the people that I want to be around? Who haven't I seen in some time? If something good is happening, and we see the 9 of Cups here, so we hope that it is, then who do I want to tell? Who are the people that I really want to share this with? And beyond that, leaning into this 6, kind of an evolution of the 3 into the 6, we might be thinking about who do I want to connect with? Who do I want to be in community with and celebrate with? And from there, what are our visions for what we want to bring into the community? Now, this has me thinking about some of that Libra South Node material hanging out in the 11th house for you. You might be pulling away from some old communities, from some communities that no longer align with who you have become. And perhaps the sun moving through your 9th house is able to show you some of where you've been and who you've become in that time, and make it easier for you to recognize what doesn't call to you anymore. The North Node hanging out in your 5th house is all about self-expression. So you're being called to step away from communities that don't play fair. Let's think of some shadow Libra themes. Don't play fair. Don't no longer advocate for what you are currently advocating for. Maybe you are the one who has changed, which is what I said a moment ago, and maybe you now advocate for something different than what your communities are aligned with. So there's certainly some kind of quest to not only maybe think about what we want for community while we're thinking about who we want to celebrate with, but also thinking about the past. And again, that kind of fulfills that ninth house perspective. Where have I been that felt good? Who have I been around that felt really lovely? What kind of communities do I want to be a part of that remind me of something that feels good to me? So let's go ahead and start to see what else we need to see here in this reading for the month. And I think, I'm absolutely thinking about Mercury entering your 10th house, entering that Virgo space sometime this season, and then preparing to station retrograde. And from that place, Mercury may be making decisions about, if this is what I see for myself, then these are the changes that I need to make in terms of what I'm building up to. Okay, Jupiter, your ruler, absolutely. Okay, and Jupiter is hanging out in Taurus in your 6th house. And so that is who is ruling you currently. That brings me back to the 6 of Cups, thinking about 6 and how this is, the 6th house is a house of service, what we are in service to, who we are helpful to. And this may be a time where you are considering how you've been showing up and what needs to change about that in order to feel right to you. We're looking at Pisces here, which is your 4th house, and that's where Saturn's hanging out. And of course, Mars will be opposing that Saturn. There might be something you're trying to accomplish in the 10th house of career, legacy, and reputation that Saturn in your 4th house is blocking you. Is there, some emotional need that needs to be spoken to? Is there a familial obligation that you need to respond to? And if that's the case, then what kind of hopes do we have for fulfilling that obligation, and what does that mean for us? And we're looking at 3, which brings me back to this 3 of Cups and makes me think about the full moon in your 3rd house. And it might be important for you to consider who your kind of peers and friends are at this time, or who you want them to be, right? And we could make kind of a story here. Who do I want my friends to be? What kind of wishes do I want to cast into the universe to make that happen? And from there, where could we go? And what could we bring to our community? And how would that feel good to me? Okay, so Sagittarius, thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this, please give it a like, please share, please subscribe. And I'm so grateful to have had your time. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time for Virgo season. Okay, Capricorn, welcome. Let's take a look at this Leo season for you. All right, as we explore Leo season, we're doing so remembering, no. Okay, Capricorn, let's take a look at your month ahead. Now, when we look at Leo season, we're looking at the sun traveling through your 8th house of psychological space, ancestral lineage, shared resources, our connections to our employer, our landlord, all of those nice contractual agreements. And that puts the full moon in Aquarius in your 2nd house of my resources, my money, what I do to make money and what I value. We have Venus also hanging out in retrograde in your 8th house. And from there, she's ruling your 10th house of career, legacy, and reputation, as well as your 5th house of fun, play, children, self-expression. We have the North Node in Aries hanging out in your 4th house of home, emotional body, privacy, and origin. And that puts the South Node in Libra in that same 10th house that we just mentioned of reputation, career, and legacy. And they'll be squaring Pluto retrograde in your 1st house of self and how I show up in the world. Mars in Virgo is hanging out in your 9th. Saturn is down in your 3rd. The 9th is your house of higher learning, of religion and philosophy. And the 3rd is your house of local environment, neighborhoods, siblings and peers, and the mind. And lastly, Mercury is also hanging out in your 8th house, preparing to station retrograde in your 9th house. So let's take a look at what we've got in store for you. And remember that we are looking at this through the lens of the Chariot, who is inviting us into our subconscious space to help us reconcile any disconnect that we feel between our conscious and our unconscious. And the Sun, our card for Leo season, showing us this period of emerging from a place of deep subconscious, of knowing ourselves, seeing our true inner light come to life. Okay, so what do we have in store here? Okay, coming out with a bang. This is exciting to see, but it's not without its shadow as well. Okay, we've got a lot going on here. We've got a major, we've got a court, and then we've got a couple of cups. Okay, so I love seeing the Magician. We love the Magician. The Magician is always a sign that we're thinking about what it is that we're honing in on and that we have the tools for currently, or that the tools are currently lining up for us. Mercury is focal here, is central to this. This is a Mercury card, thinking about Mercury about to station retrograde. Okay, so we are perhaps thinking about what tools we might need. Maybe we're getting clear on what it is we're hoping will align. Maybe we're thinking about or taking a look at what tools are showing up for us at this time and what we're able to accomplish with them. But the Magician is definitely a potent energy where we are aware of some alignment taking place, some timing working out, again, very Mercury, some timing and being strategic in what we can pull off, what we can accomplish at this time. 10 of Cups showing us we're thinking about fulfillment. We're thinking about emotional contentment. And the 10 of Cups is a sort of reaching a pinnacle, if you will. It's the end of the suit, right, before we reach the court cards. And so it is absolutely a time of celebration, of being excited and happy and fulfilled by what emotional situations we are finding ourselves in. Okay, so maybe we are finding ourselves at a period of celebrating. Maybe we're thinking about what that would look like and what we would want. Maybe these things go together. Maybe tools are lining up for us in such a way that we are able to celebrate the fulfillment that we are experiencing. Now let's look at this kind of darker, shadowy 8 of Cups here, kind of lingering amongst the bounty that we have. The 8 of Cups is very different than the 10. The 10 is, as I just stated, is a place of fulfillment. We have reached a summit and we are looking and reflecting on that experience and celebrating that. In the 8, just a couple of cards before this, we are pulling away from something that we have maybe once felt was celebratory, maybe once felt was fulfilling. If we think about the traditional Rider-Waite image, this is where there's a cloaked figure looking at 8 Cups standing on the beach. So it's difficult because we've spent time in this place. We've put together this boat. We've been sailing on a journey. That's not casual, right? We're not at the beginning of the Cups. So this is not a casual venture. To sail away off into the sunset can have the connotation of we're happy, but it can also be the sun has set on this particular scenario. And there may be a recognition of something that is coming to an end, or really what I mean to say is with something that we are ready to end because other cards really indicate that things are coming to an end outside of our control. The 8 of Cups is a choice on our part. We are the ones weighing out what is coming to fruition and whether or not it's worth it to us, whether or not it is still able to fill those same cups the way that it was before. And we may find that something doesn't fill us the same way that it used to. And that might be a difficult period. We are looking at a couple of different retrogrades, and that does tend to bring something to an end, right? We're also thinking about Venus stationing retrograde and ruling that 10th house. While the South Node's traveling through there, that can feel like a daunting thing to, I don't know, to accept. Some part of our career or our legacy or our reputation ending in some way. And really for us, it might be choosing to decide, kind of redundant, choosing to decide that something up there doesn't matter to us anymore, regardless of whether or not it looks pretty, whether or not it is still standing tall on its own. If we're not feeling it, then it's not for us, okay? And then this Queen of Pentacles is really beautiful. Love this for us Capricorns who are always trying to manage our resources. This is absolutely a sign of being connected to our resources in such a way that we feel really supported by them, so much that we can reflect them outward. We can be the ones to show other people where resources are accessible. We can be the ones to be delegating those resources. The King of Pentacles is really the one who, I always joke, is signing the paychecks. The Queen might be the one handing them out. So it might not be that you are connected to such vast wealth on your own that you are able to just spread that purely, but it may be that you are reaching a place this Leo season, and I'm coming back to Venus in your 8th, thinking about that shared resource space. I know Mars was just through there and probably had us really emptying out more of the vault than we were taking in. That's kind of Mars' separative nature. Mars was separating you from your resources in the 8th. Venus here is one who attracts, and so Venus being retrograde in that 8th house space may be bringing you to a place of new understanding, deeper connection with what your current resources are and where there's bounty in there. What feels potentially 5 of Pentacles right now, or has felt 5 of Pentacles in the recent past, may kind of manifest into something more bountiful. It may be that you come into some resources, you are able to develop some resources. Again, here's the Magician showing up. So maybe we're able to make something happen that really allows us to connect with a sense of bounty. So I really love that. I love that these two may go hand in hand. We may be thinking about what's making us happy and recognizing that something in the current inventory is not it. That's okay. The tools are lining up for us to make something bigger than us happen. And it might be that whatever we're sailing away from isn't actually for us. And that's something that we know, thinking about the sequence of these cups. After the 8, we get to the 9, which is the wish card. We don't get wishes for free. We get wishes because we have separated from something that no longer served us. We don't get wishes because we want them. We get wishes because we create the space for them. So that wish card, I know, kind of a loaded word, but that card of intention, let's say, emotional intention, there we go. I'm putting into the universe what I do want to fill my cups because I have recognized what doesn't. Actually opens us up to the collaboration of the universe, right? So that may also connect us with this sense of bounty. Maybe we've been in a place of stress. Maybe we have been holding on to something that isn't filling us back. And in creating that space, we actually welcome in something very grounding, emotional, material, leading us to this place of support and firmness. Okay, so let's go ahead and roll the dice, shall we, and see what else we need to know about this Leo season for you. Okay, we've got Pluto and Capricorn. Okay, so that first house is not messing around, all right? That first house, Pluto, who is retrograde for the second of 3 times, ending this final couple of degrees of Capricorn. We'll have this one more time. Pluto will re-enter Aquarius in January, move into the 1st degree, and will retrograde back once more in the spring, and we'll hit that 29th degree of of Capricorn one more time. So this nodal square, these final Pluto rotations through this space are really serious business for you. Pluto spent 16 years in your 1st house. Pluto overhauled you completely. At some point, if you have an IC-MC line on the Aries Libra axis as a Capricorn rising, then Pluto has squared that axis while it's been in your 1st house. So you have radically evolved. Let's not discount what this nodal square to your 4th and 10th houses will look like. You will be a different person. this nodal square on or close to or hanging out near those 10th, 4th houses, really kind of shaking you out of where you've come from and where you think you're going. And so it makes a lot of sense that we might consider, oh, something I've been holding on to actually does not make sense for me. And the second I let go of it, something radical might happen. That takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of strength. If you are not there, please try not to hold that against yourself. The nodes will square Pluto and something will unfold, whether or not we're conscious of it. And let's look at 3 here. Your 3rd house is Pisces. I'm thinking about that being ruled by Jupiter, who's in your 5th, and also where Saturn is. Saturn in your 3rd is trying to firm up some ideas of yours, right? That 3rd house of the mind. And so it might be that something, Saturn chips away at things. Saturn might need you to separate from something in order to make space for everything else. So think about that 3rd house a bit and what that kind of immediate environment, neighborhood, peer, sibling space might look like for you and how that might fall into this storyline. Capricorn, thank you so much for tuning in. Please, if you enjoyed this, give it a like, share it, subscribe, and let me know in the comments how it lands for you. We will see you next time for our Virgo season look ahead. Okay, Aquarius, welcome to your Leo season look ahead. So when we are looking at Leo season, we are looking at the sun moving through your 7th house of one-on-one relationships, be they business, romantic, enemy, or friend. And that puts the full moon in your 1st house of self and how I show up in the world. We've got Venus also hanging out in your 7th, moving retrograde, and from there she's ruling your 9th house of faraway travel, of higher learning, of religion and philosophy, as well as your 4th house of home, origin, emotional body. We have the North Node hanging out in your 3rd house of neighborhood, immediate environment, peers and siblings, and the mind, and the Libra South Node opposite in the 9th house, as we just described. And those are squaring Pluto retrograde, moving back into your 12th house of what it all really adds up to: mental health, karma, solitude. We have Mars and Virgo hanging out in your 8th house of shared resources, mine and yours, my boss, my landlord, my government. And we have Saturn hanging out in your 2nd house of my resources, my stuff, and what I do to make money. And lastly, we have Mercury hanging out in your 7th as well and preparing to station retrograde in your 8th house. Okay, so let's see what we got here. And we'll be looking at these cards we pulled today through the lens of the Chariot, who is our card of the year, reminding us to become conscious of our unconscious motivations so that we can steer with integrity, as well as the Sun, who is showing us our radiant inner child light as we emerge from a deep subconscious space of knowing. Okay, so talk about deep subconscious spaces. Oh my, Aquarius, do you have? Okay, well, okay. So this ain't no regular rodeo. This is, we've got a whole bunch of stories happening here. What kind of journey are you on right now, Aquarius? It is not one of the day-to-day variety. And would it ever be? You are out in space sometimes. You are talking to the aliens. You are living in otherworldly life. So how could I be surprised? So let's look at these major arcana cards here. Some big themes. These friends are neighbors, and that's fun. So we're looking at kind of a subsequent story here. We're looking at a narrative unfolding, and then we have the Empress, who of course is represented by Venus, and we'll connect with that in just a second. But Strength and the Hermit are cards that go back to back in the major arcana, 8 and 9. And so we are looking at a story of going inward, all right? we are turning within, and maybe that has a lot to do with Mars hanging out in your 8th house, as well as Mercury preparing to station retrograde in your 8th house, stationing retrograde at the top of Virgo season, that very first day. I'm getting 8th house, kind of quiet house space activity, as well as some of that 4th house that we talked about, Venus ruling, that Taurus house of home, the emotional body. So there's a lot of activity in these kind of darker houses happening for you. Jupiter's hanging out in your 4th house, right? Uranus is hanging out in your 4th house. So those are some bigger journeys that are bringing your awareness into your more subconscious spaces. So we see some kind of, and we, oh, let me not forget, before I get ahead of myself, we also just mentioned that Pluto's hanging out in your 12th house for its retrograde time. So all of your dark houses are being activated right now. All right. Okay, now we can continue. So we're looking at a triad of subconscious, deep emotional spaces being brought into your forefront in some way. Especially with that nodal square to Pluto, the 3rd and 9th houses do reflect the mind. In fact, all of that grand cross, if we think about the 12th, the 3rd, the 6th, and the 9th, are all connected to our perspective and how much it is able to be grounded in and accepted by reality, whatever that reality is for us, right? So the 3rd house is where our ideas originate. The 6th house is where we put them into practice through repetition, through creating something tangible out of information. And the 9th is where we travel to meet others and showcase what we have refined and decide on what it is called. And in the 12th house, we get a sense of whether or not our perspective lines up with that definition. Okay, so see how they all connect. And this is a space that's really potent for you right now. Strength is all about our like inner instincts. Talk about the Chariot. The Chariot actually leads us into this journey. So the Chariot is where we get in tune with what kind of motivations are leading the ship, right? Are steering us. And in strength, we recognize the need to get to know and build a relationship to those instincts within us. You know, it might be that the lovers before this shows us the mental extension of our conscious to unconscious selves. We are reaching out. This is me mimicking my own tarot card. We are reaching out to our own selves. In the Chariot, we deepen that mental work through the emotional connection. So in strength, we have a much more kind of subconscious womb space, brain space, kind of like, what is this, who's in charge here? Right? And so we need to build a relationship too. It's not enough just to realign them once. Why did I think of tires? Because we're looking at a Chariot. It's a vehicle. Okay, so it's not just getting your tires realigned, right? You know, you gotta like do it several times for maintenance. So I think strength is one of those maintenance cards where we are recognizing that it needs to be kind of ritualistic, our relationship to our instincts. We need to check back in and make sure that things are still good. So this is where we build that ongoing relationship, where we recognize that we might be fearful of some of what's happening. We may try to tame something that's happening, but really it's allowing each to exist in their beautiful balance, trusting each other, knowing that the other could harm the other, but we choose not to. This is where we start to work through self-sabotage. So when we see the Hermit following, we're looking at an invitation to continue that maintenance work. All right, this is where we see Virgo vibes. Your 8th house space. And so this is where we see some of that, like, I'm choosing to go into this space on a regular basis. I'm choosing to go into my secret magic cave, because when I do that, I stay in alignment with who I really am, who I'm really trying to become, and what my inner light is guiding me toward. Okay, so this month really sees you traveling into some of these deeper spaces, getting to know these systems, really structuring the relationship for yourself to those darker houses, because they're hard to see. The 4th house is the only one that we can see. It's angular. We can use things in there, but the 8th and the 12th houses are notoriously bad in traditional astrology because we can't see into them. So this is you building that sight into those spaces. I love that it kind of leads us to this beautiful landscape. Oh, I am so vast, so rich, so connected to the earth in whatever way that looks like to me. I am a fertile landscape that can create abundance. Okay, and that's very earthly, right? Again, very Venus, and Venus is retrograde in your 7th house. And so maybe you are reflecting on, I'm just sort of creating these sections here. This may feel kind of like that 7th house retrograde energy. We're thinking about how Venus is trying to reconsider how she's in relationship to other people in that 7th house. And so in this process, we are either strengthening, well, I'm not going to say either. We're definitely strengthening this emotional self-care. I'm kind of tired of that phrase self-care. So we're going to change that immediately to emotional self-support, emotional self-structuring. Okay, we are aware of what flows within us, and we need to give it shape. We need to bring life to it. We need to allow it to be, and to be wild, and to hold space for that, and to just know it and feel it and be in tune with it. So I definitely sense, this waterfall being so close to this beautiful fertile landscape. It feels like they go hand in hand. The more we focus on what our emotional needs are this month, and whether we have a really solid emotional self-structure plan, whether this is something we've been neglecting or haven't had the time and space to figure out, this is it. And there's definitely a connection between how you can hold space for your own emotions and what that allows you to feel connected to in terms of what you create and hold space for in the whole world. Okay, so let's roll these dice and get a look at what else is in here that we need to know. I love these sort of internal and external processes, right? The landscape, the waterfall being these earthly, kind of outside of us images, and these images really showing us that we're traveling within. We have Cancer, which is your 6th house. We have Pluto hanging out in your 12th house. And we have 9, which is where the South Node is about to hang out, also ruled by Venus, who we've been chatting about. Maybe it's that 6th house, 12th house line needs something. And that certainly does, again, kind of connect us back with what space am I able to hold for myself? And have I not had the time to do this before? That's certainly a 6th house Cancer vibe for you, Aquarius. Maybe I have not been able to pay as much attention to my physical body and my time, 6th house, my routine, and how that connects to my mental health in the 12th house. And this may be a call to explore that. Now, I'm of course curious about this 9th house because we said that's where the nodal square is happening to Pluto. And so there may be a withdrawal from some of these bigger spaces. That makes a lot of sense. If we're traveling inward, that means we have to pay attention to the inside, and that means turning away from the outside. Maybe we're letting go of some of our ideas about where we needed to be going, or some of our instincts around what we needed to learn, or how qualified we need to be to teach other people is a thought that just came to mind as an example. So the more we are kind of turning inward, we might be feeling a pull away from some of that 9th house activity. But you let me know specifically what that brings up for you. Okay, Aquarius, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this, please like it, please share it, please subscribe, and we'll see you here next time for our Virgo season look ahead. Hello, Pisces. Welcome to your Leo season look ahead. All right, so when we are looking at Leo season, we're looking at the sun moving through your 6th house of time, body, routine, and what we are in service to. And that puts the full moon in Aquarius in your 12th house of what it all really means, what it all adds up to, my mental health, my sense of karma, and my experiences of solitude. We have Venus also retrograde in your 6th house, and from there she's ruling your 8th house of shared resources, of ancestry, of yours and mine, and also ruling your 3rd house of immediate environment, local neighborhood, the mind, peers, and siblings. We have the North Node in Aries hanging out in your 2nd house of my resources, what I do for money, what I value. And the Libra South Node in your 8th house of, again, those shared resources we just talked about. And they are in a T-square to Pluto retrograde in your 11th house of community, friends, hopes and dreams for the future, and grandchildren. We have Mars and Virgo hanging out in your 7th house of one-on-one relationships, business, friend, romantic, enemy. We have Saturn hanging out in your 1st house of self and how you move through the world. And lastly, we've got Mercury also hanging out in your 6th house and preparing to station retrograde in your 7th house of one-on-one relationships with Virgo. Okay, let's take a look at what we've got in store for you this season. And we'll be tying this into our narrative. We've been exploring underneath the Chariot, our card for the year, which is bringing us back to reconcile our conscious and unconscious motivations, as well as the Sun, our card for the Sun, which rules Leo season, showing us our radiant inner light, our authenticity, and revealing to us what we felt has been lost or hidden. Okay, let's take a look at what we've got in store. Okay, absolutely. I'm already getting 8th house, South Node vibes. Okay. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So, I'm only about halfway through all of these polls. I always start with the first sign of the season. You're the first one to have all majors. This is huge. Okay. This is really big. Whew. Okay. I'm like, where do we even start? Let's start on the outside. We've got the final cards of the major arcana bookending this reading. Fascinating that we've got like the midpoint of the major arcana also present. And then, of course, who doesn't love to see the Tower? Okay, so what are we ending? I mean, again, I just sang to you that what was coming through immediately was surrounding all of the 8th house South Node vibes. Okay, so we know that the 8th house is a house of endings. All of those 4th, 8th, 12th dark houses are houses of endings. And that sounds really dramatic. And maybe it is because the Tower's here, but we're not going to be fearful of it because we know that we have choices and we have agency. Okay, so something is certainly coming to an end. Maybe you have felt this coming. Maybe this is something that you are prepared for. The Tower, again, is throwing this curveball of maybe you didn't ask for this. And 8th house vibes are kind of like that sometimes. I describe the 8th house as as like a club that you don't get to control the guest list for. So someone else has the VIP list. Someone else is sending out those invites. All right, you don't get to do that. You're the party decorator. You're the one who gets to decorate the 8th house. So you are in charge of planning the party, of holding space for the party, perhaps, but you're not the one, again, deciding who's attending. And that might be an apt metaphor for a Libra 8th house, which is very much about some of those social constructs that we uphold. I love to tell the story about how Libra didn't exist as a sign, according to Demetra George's Asteroid Goddesses, until the Romans came and decided to put an end to matriarchy. So the Romans came and they did not enjoy the fact that women and queens were just holding orgies for children to be born and people not knowing the paternal lineage. And so the way the Romans solved this was by extracting a constellation from the head of Scorpio and calling it Libra and creating a social boundary between what I do for me and what I give to others. And when I say give, I mean that in the biblical sense. So we're really talking about social rules that are meant to corral human instincts, okay? And some of those are important. We are humans. living in a somewhat civilized society, and in order to maintain that civilized society, we need some sense of law and order. Very Libra. And some of those rules are really harmful. Some of those rules are really imbalanced. Some of those rules were not designed with equality in mind. So, Libra 8th house, what are you letting go of there? Judgment is right before the world, and judgment shows that we are in a place where we are reflecting back on the journey of arriving here at this endpoint, whatever this endpoint is for whatever cycle is currently cycling. And we are reflecting back and understanding for ourselves what didn't go according to our expectations, what did not turn out the way that we hoped, and where perhaps we were not the people we hoped we would be in that situation. Judgment is about owning that for ourselves, looking back and acknowledging that, I like to use the phrase, I knew what I knew when I did this, and now I know more. So we've evolved, hopefully. And so when we reach this place of judgment, we are doing this work of kind of going through everything we've experienced and recognizing perhaps what we could have done differently, but knowing that, again, we did what we knew to do at the time. We're kind of letting ourselves be free of judgment in the judgment card. We are not just letting ourselves off the hook. We're recognizing that, you know, again, we really want to be aware of what we can do differently. And that is this process. This is absolutely this process. From judgment, we reach the world where something comes to an end. We acknowledge, Saturn style, that something has come to some sort of close. And we recognize that by ending this thing, we are starting the journey over. So this might be a period of closure for you. In terms of kind of what is coming to an end and what you're able to recognize and see there, and what makes sense to you about this journey. Now, let's tackle this meat of the sandwich. Okay, so the Tower is obviously some indication of some disruption. Now, the Tower is not always a huge dramatic event. The Tower can absolutely be a sense of realization within ourselves. Maybe some of this reflecting brings you to a sudden realization of something. Maybe you become clear on what I did before and what I'm gonna do differently when the wheel turns. Okay. So we are certainly looking at some period of tension, some period of disconnection, perhaps, of frustration, of realizing we're not on the path we wanted to be on, having something change rapidly that we weren't expecting. It can really ride the spectrum in terms of what that tumultuousness looks like for you. Again, it can be fully internal. It does not have to be an external event that goes wrong. But there is absolutely this opportunity here. The Wheel of Fortune is an indication that the wheel will turn once more. And I love, we have a lot of cycles going on here. We're ending a cycle, and we may not be back at the Fool. We may not see the Fool here. We may not be starting all the way over. Perhaps this is an opportunity for a do-over in a strange way. I love that for you, and that feels really fun. Maybe this isn't ending all the way. Maybe we are allowing our version of things to end, or we are coming to some sort of closure for ourselves, and yet there's some chance to do different or to do better. Maybe it's not even the same situation. Maybe this does come to a close and we're able to reflect on this to allow for this closure. But suddenly something emerges and we have an opportunity that comes through. I am so curious and I really want to know what this means. Okay, let's roll these dice, get a sense of what else we need to know. I will let this stand. We've got 11 here. All right. And, I was kind of thinking about Pluto retrograde in your 11th house. So, let's absolutely tie in that Pluto square from the 11th to those nodes in the 2nd and the 8th. The 11th is your house of future, of hopes and dreams for that future, of communities you're part of friendships. And so it may be that, yes, and we see Saturn in your 1st house. Okay, so it may be that there's something in that 11th house that Pluto's coming through to kind of get you to reconsider something that has been ending for some time, because we know Pluto's been in Capricorn for 16 years. So maybe something is ready to come to a close, and maybe this square opens up something big for you in terms of that second house of what I do for my resources, and that 8th house of what I share with other people. We see Saturn here in your 1st house, and that's ruling that Pluto right now, as well as the full moon happening in your 12th house. And that full moon in your 12th house could absolutely also be an indication of that closure. Any transits in your 12th house, especially a full moon, which we know to be a culmination, a finishing, right? Where we are reaching the peak of this lunation cycle, and from here, things will begin to wane. So it may absolutely be that the full moon in your 12th house of mental health, of endings, of what it all really means, before we have the full moon in your 1st house, really illuminating for you who you have become and who you are now. This 12th house moon might be asking you to clear some things out, clear out some stories. So let's tie in Leo here. And we see that Leo is your 6th house. That's where the sun is. That's where Venus is about to, or is moving retrograde rather, and also where we have Mercury. And so perhaps there's something in that 6th house that we need to pay attention to as well. We need to think about what you are in service to, what your time and body are able to handle, and what kind of routines you have. And so perhaps there's something you've been doing in the 6th house that's ready to end as well. Maybe that becomes clear with the full moon in the 12th house. Okay, this is a lot of big energy. This is not necessarily a story that's going to wrap up this season, because it's major arcana cards, because we are looking at so many big, like, archetypal narratives. This may be an ongoing thing. So let me know how this lands for you in the comments, Pisces. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please like, please share, please subscribe, and I'll see you here next time for our Virgo season peak. All right, thank you. Hello, Aries. Welcome to your season ahead. Let's get started. All right, so as we talk about Leo season, we're looking at the sun traveling through your 5th house of play, joy, children, and self-expression, and that puts the full moon in your 11th house of hopes and dreams for the future, grandchildren, friends, and communities that we're part of. We have Venus retrograde also hanging out in your 5th house, and from there she's ruling your 7th house of one-on-one relationships with others, business, friend, lover, enemy, as well as your 2nd house of personal resources, skills, and values. We have the North Node hanging out in your 1st house of self and how I move through the world, and the South Node in Libra hanging out in that same 7th house we just described. And those are squaring Pluto retrograde from your 10th house of career, legacy, and reputation. Mars is hanging out in Virgo in your 6th house, which is its house of joy. This is the house of routine, body, and time. Mars here loves to be really productive. And we have Saturn hanging out in your 12th house of endings, of what it all really adds up to in the end, of mental health and karma. And we've got Mercury hanging out in your 5th house as well, preparing to station retrograde in your 6th house. Okay, so let's take a look. And we're gonna pull these cards through the narrative we've been establishing with the Chariot, our card for the year, which is inviting us into reconciliation of our conscious and unconscious motivations, and the Sun, which is our card for the Sun, which rules Leo season. And we're thinking about how that's showing us ourselves, how that is showing us our inner child, our true light, and kind of seeing our genuine selves as we emerge from our deep subconscious. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull these cards. Okay. Okay, so I know usually I put them down and then I flip them, but I just went for it today. Okay, so interesting. We've got some early stage cards, and then we have a court card. So With the Three of Swords, we are acknowledging some sort of pain. We are doing so in a way that allows for catharsis. We're doing so in a way that allows us to really feel what it is that we're feeling, and that can be stressful, but ultimately it is a card of release. It's showing us our relationship to the pain that we're experiencing and allowing ourselves to have that relationship in real time. You see the Knight of Wands here, which is about spreading some word, putting some sort of passion or magic into the world around us. We have the Eight of Wands here surrounding this hot air balloon, and so there's an energy of, I have a message to put out into the world and I'm ready to take flight with it. Maybe there's catharsis that allows you to step into the world with something that you're ready to share. And then we have these pentacles here, which show us about something tangible about us. The Two of Pentacles showing us a sense of balance that needs to be looked at or leaned into now if you're feeling out of balance. And I'm thinking kind of this second house space where the that Venus rules, kind of thinking about that second house space, as well as this first house, seventh house axis, because that's very much about balance too. And just thinking about maybe coming back to basics, coming back to a place of balance where we are able to get a sense of where we're trying to grow and what roots we need to deepen in order to support that growth. And on the end of this, we have the Five of Pentacles, who is showing us about some feeling of lack, some feeling of being without. And I say feeling because the journey of the Five of Pentacles is one of acknowledging where we have lack and then looking inward to find those resources exist around us. I'll cite the Rider-Waite image, which is a cloaked couple or pair standing out in the snow, and they look like they are unhoused, for example, or they feel that they are locked out of having what they need. And there's a church window behind them. And the idea is that there are resources if we are able to kind of change our perspective and look at where we might be able to receive help. A lot of times we are told not to need help. We are shamed into needing help, or out of needing help, rather. We are tormented by the have and not having enough. There's a lot of emotion that comes into the Five of Pentacles. And so it's important to recognize that access to resources can be possible, but we do need to be willing and able to look for them and actually step through those doors. And again, there can be a lot of shame or a lot of deep emotions, I will say. I can't name them for you because they're very personal, but there are a lot of feelings that come with experiencing lack. So let's roll some of these. Let's roll these dice and get an idea of what else we need to know about this reading. This is a very on the ground kind of, I say that and I'm looking at a hot air balloon. So this is for the most part a very kind of basic day-to-day kind of maintenance spread. It looks like we're tackling some just not anything too archetypal, anything too big picture, but really dealing with what's happening in the here and now. And maybe that's some of the activity happening in your sixth house, literally, of day-to-day and routine. Maybe we are leaning into that sixth house energy and wanting to put in effort into getting these things tackled, okay? We have 7, which is your 7th house, which is ruled by Venus and where the South Node is hanging out. And there may be some cause for pain in that 7th house, since the South Node is calling on us to release what does not belong there, what's holding us back from that first house of self really expressing itself. And maybe that's some of where the Knight of Wands kicks in as well, kicks into gear, that feeling of I can take off, I can be, if I acknowledge this, then it frees up energy to go this way. I see the moon, and we talked about this full moon happening in your 11th house of hopes and dreams for the future. It may be that we feel like we have hopes and dreams for the future and we don't have enough for them, but that house is also the house of community. And it may be that you may acknowledge what you don't have, and those people may be people you can reach out to get it. There may be friends and community who can connect you with those resources, but you do need to express what is needed, right? And we have Gemini, which is your 3rd house. And that is a very local environment, kind of day-to-day house. That's also the house of the mind. So I'm thinking about Mercury hanging out in your 5th house, moving into your 6th house and ruling this house. Perhaps what Mercury is preparing to station retrograde regarding is pertaining to your 6th house and your 3rd house and how they connect. Mercury, again, will be in that 6th house space, ruling that for 3rd house and while it's retrograde, and will also square that space. And so you may be compelled into change there. It may be my day-to-day needs are evolving. My day-to-day needs need attention, and Mercury ruling this 3rd house is maybe thinking about where my mind ties into that. I'm also thinking about the 3 of Swords, a 3, and your 3rd house and the mind. And so it might be that we need to acknowledge some 3rd house vibe, 3rd house activity, maybe a perspective, maybe something we're holding on to in the mind. We need to look there to understand kind of what we need to fix this pentacle space, what we need to feel more supported, feel more grounded, feel more balanced, okay? And thinking about this as connecting us to the Chariot, something instinctual is beneath the surface, perhaps, that needs to be made known. And it may be that making this known is feeling overwhelming, but it's the thing we need to know in order to align our conscious and unconscious motivations, to know what's behind the wheel here steering us. And of course, by moving through this process, we see more of ourselves. We see ourselves emerging. I really feel that 1st house being significant for you this season, and also this nodal journey through Aries and Libra. Your 1st house will really be activated, and you will be asked to kind of step into some uncomfortable situations that put you first, and that might be hard. Maybe that is difficult to acknowledge, but maybe that's been contributing to the feeling of lack. Maybe by not putting yourself first, you've been experiencing some feeling of lack that you are able to solve by looking outside of that configuration currently. Okay, Aries, thank you so much for watching. Let me know how that lands for you in the comments. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time for your Virgo season preview. All right, see you then. Hello, Taurus. Welcome to your Leo season preview. All right, so as we are exploring Leo season, we're looking at the sun traveling through your 4th house of emotional body, home, origin. We are seeing the full moon in your 10th house of career, legacy, and reputation. We have Venus also retrograde in that 4th house, and from there, she's ruling your 6th house of time, routine, and the body, as well as your 1st house of self and how I move through the world. This nodal axis has the North Node in your 12th house of karma, of endings, of what it all adds up to in the end, of my mental health. And we have the South Node in Libra in that same 6th house we just described of time, routine, and the body. And they're squaring Pluto, who's retrograde in your 9th house of faraway travel, of higher learning, philosophy, and religion. We have Mars and Virgo traveling through your 5th house of self-expression, of play, joy, and children. And we have Saturn and Pisces hanging out in your 11th house of hopes and dreams for the future, of friends and community, and of grandchildren. And last but not least, we've got Mercury also hanging out in your 4th house of home and origin, preparing to station retrograde in your 5th house of joy, play, and self-expression. Okay, let's get started. So we are going to look at these cards we pull through the narrative we've been stringing with the Chariot this year, thinking about where we're being invited into deeper reflection on our conscious and unconscious instincts to align them so that they are working in tandem. And the Sun, which is the card that rules Leo, and shows us our true selves, our radiant inner beings as we've traveled through a period of darkness and shadow to see our true self. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. Aha! All right. Ooh, ooh. So much fire, a little water, and some earth. All right. Nice and balanced for you, Taurus. Okay. We've got 1 major and 3 very early stage suit cards. So I love that we've got a little variety here, right? We've got a little wands, a little bit of cups, a little bit of pentacles, a little bit of Monica. Okay, so the Emperor is, of course, an Aries energy card. I love thinking about the North Node hanging out in your 12th house and really pulling you into a place of exploring what it all means to you. What it is in that 12th house space that, you know, the 12th house notoriously in traditional astrology kind of looms above the ascendant and can haunt us at times, can be just out of reach, and can sometimes be visible to other people but not to us. So this North Node journey is calling you into that 12th house space to become more aware of what that space looks like to you. And I love thinking about this as a strengthening card for you, as a strengthening time and a strengthening journey. You've just had the North Node in your first house. You've been doing all this work about who am I and how do I show up in the world? And where am I pulling away from relationships in my 7th house that I'm not showing up for in a great way, that aren't showing up for me in a great way, and just aren't really playing out in a way that feels good to any of us. So we're now shifting gears into kind of that dark subconscious space of, and what's in here that we must get clear on? The 3 of Wands is delightful. We're thinking about where we're going, and we're starting that journey. So as Venus is retrograde in your 4th house, ruling your 1st house, we might be getting a sense of, where do I want to be going next, and why haven't I taken that first step? Or what's been holding me back that I haven't felt ready for, but that I'm now gonna just start moving toward. We're gonna tie in that South Node in the 6th house as well, as we think about the Emperor and the 3 of Wands, because that Libra South Node has you becoming aware of how you use your time, how you use your body, what kind of routines you're a part of, what you're in service to that may not be feeling so good for you anymore. The same way we just acknowledged you released all of that in your 7th house, or at least hopefully became aware of some of those things to begin working through and releasing. We're now shifting that focus into what that time looks like for you and whether or not you are like self-determined in that time. The Emperor is a self-determined energy. This is Aries vibes in the healthiest form. We are ready to chart our own course, but we're doing so with the people behind us in mind. So we are doing so in such a way that we can model and demonstrate for them how to find their own path or how to follow ours. And we're holding a sense of kind of responsible autonomy. To do so means to let go of where we've been in service to something that is not helpful to them or to us, perhaps. And when we consider all of this, we certainly get a sense of, oh, it's time to start moving in a direction. That's definitely what's happening in the Emperor. The compass is here showing us the path. And the 3 has us beginning to wander. Look at this little figure in the distance. It's made some progress, right? It's walking toward whatever is summoning them. So if you've been held back from following where you need to chart course, this is the time that we are getting clear on kind of, where haven't I been going that I need to go? Where have I been held back or holding myself back? I love looking at this 2 of Cups. It's so sweet. I'm thinking about the activity happening in your 5th house, as well as what's just been freed up in your 7th house with the South Node finally gone. Mars is ruling your 7th house from your 5th house. So there's a lot of relational themes coming up this term for you. The 5th house is not only self-expression in general, where we just, here's who I am. This is how I am. This is the role that I play amongst the group, perhaps. But there's a deeper sense of how I express affection and how I flirt with people is very 5th house, how I attract people. And the 5th and the 7th house are sextile, so they do they see each other, and one kind of leads to the other. Who I'm attracted to in the 5th house and flirt with in this 5th house is hopefully someone who moves into the 7th house space with me and becomes one-on-one. So you are giving a lot of thought to what that looks like for you this month, and thinking about, now that the South Node is gone in the 7th house, who do I want to invite in here? What kind of connections do I want to have? Who am I chatting with? Okay, I love that. And we end with the 4 of Pentacles. I'm inclined to think about Venus retrograde in your 4th house, as well as the Sun and that Cazimi happening in your 4th house. I'm inclined to think about Mercury preparing to, or moving through your 4th house as well before it prepares for retrograde. So I'm thinking about all of these rooted themes. What do I feel like I am outgrowing, but I don't really have the resources to take in more? Where have I been saving up for a bigger pot, for example? We've got all these roots growing out and we need some place to go. So there may be some theme about what kind of resources I have for my home. Venus being resources, ruling your chart, ruling your 6th house. Maybe there's a sense of wanting to save up for home, or to save up to decorate in our home, to redo our home in some way. Maybe this is reversed for you personally, and you are in a place where you're spending a bit more, right? We talked about kind of the concept of turning over the coin purse, I believe, in the Capricorn. Was it No, I think it was the Aries 3rd quarter moon. We talked about this idea of kind of dumping out the piggy bank and spending. So that may be how that's showing up for you, but you might be thinking about what you need to hold on to or save up for. What is holding you currently? How are your roots doing? What kind of nutrients do they need? And how are you able to bring that in for yourself? Okay, I have questions there that I'm curious about. So we're going to go ahead and roll these dice and get a sense of what might be happening here. Okay, we see Capricorn, we see Pluto, we see 8. Oh, well, okay. So thinking about Pluto in Capricorn, hanging out in your 9th house, squaring this nodal axis, and that being a lot about kind of our ideas and how they take shape in the world and what they mean to us. And what I say about the 12th house is, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, did it happen? Did it make a sound? It's a very 12th house theme. Was I the only one who saw that? Did you see that? Was that real? And what happens if only I saw it? So Pluto and the Capricorn absolutely sort of finishing up these themes in your 9th house in terms of, that could also be like our perspectives. The 9th house is where we change our mind. So I love that idea. And 8 is fascinating. I'm thinking about that Sagittarius 8th house of yours, thinking about how that's ruled by Jupiter. And maybe there is, Jupiter is currently hanging out in your 1st house of self and how you move through the world. Venus, while retrograde, will be squaring that Jupiter several times, 3 times over the course of this whole journey. So we had the 1st square, we'll have the 2nd square in retrograde, and we will have the 3rd as we finish up. And I think I'm gonna circle back to that, but Jupiter might be so early on that Jupiter does not get squared a 3rd time. Jupiter will be retrograde that 3rd time. Okay, so scratch that 3rd one, but there are squares to Jupiter coming from the 4th house to that 1st house, and perhaps there's something there that connects with the 8th house. Perhaps what we're saving up for is, or like feeling like we have to spend or want to spend, might be connected to that 8th house space, of course, because the 8th house holds our shared resources, kind of our like shared bank accounts, or our lease, our landlord. Perhaps there's something happening in that 4th house that's also connected to that 8th house space that provides some further answers. So let me know how this lands for you in the comments, Taurus. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed, please like, please share, please subscribe, and I'll see you next time for our Virgo season preview. See you then. Hello, Gemini. Let's take a look at your Leo season preview. All right, so as we discuss Leo season, we're looking at the sun moving through your 3rd house of immediate environment, the mind, neighborhood, peers, and siblings. And that puts the full moon in Aquarius in your 9th house of faraway travel, of higher learning, of religion and philosophy. We have Venus retrograde also in your 3rd house, and from there she's ruling your 5th house of self-expression, joy, and children, as well as your 12th house of endings, karma, mental health, what it all adds up to in the end. The North Node in Aries is traveling through your 11th house of friends and communities, hopes and dreams for the future, and grandchildren. And that's the Libra South Node then in your 5th house that we just described, self-expression, play, joy, and children. And they are squaring Pluto retrograde currently in your 8th house of shared resources and psychology and ancestral lines. We have Mars and Virgo moving through your 4th house of home, origin, and family, and Saturn in your 10th house of reputation, career, and legacy. And lastly, we have Mercury, your chart ruler, moving through your 4th house as well and preparing to station retrograde in, Mercury moving through your 3rd house as well and preparing to station retrograde in your 4th house. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull. And everything we look at today will be through the lens of the Chariot, our card for the year, helping us into a place of reconciling our conscious and unconscious motives, as well as the Sun, representative of ruling over Leo, showing us where we're finding our inner light, our inner child, and seeing ourselves clearly, perhaps for the first time in a long time. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay. Ooh. Aces are wild. Okay. Well, isn't this a fun picture? We've got all this earthiness, we've got all this mental air, atmosphere, and okay, very cute. I love the aces in the middle. That's really fun. So let's see what we got here. We have the Knight of Cups, who is ready to sweep someone off their feet, whether that's genuine romance, whether that's in true Gemini fashion, just getting to know you, wanting to like put forth a gesture that demonstrates that I'm interested and curious about you. This is definitely like demonstrative energy. I am really ready to show you my emotions. I love that. Ace of Pentacles is an opportunity for some sort of tangible resource, whether that's money, which Pentacles are classically affiliated with, but it could also be some sort of resource for your body. Time is a resource, right? So there could be some opportunity for growth in some way and, rooting into the self. I like that. Okay. And then we have the Ace of Swords, which is probably the preferred card from the sword suit. The beginning is the best for the swords. And so there's something emerging through, right? There's some sort of mental breakthrough, some sort of clarity. This makes me think about Mercury traveling through your 3rd and preparing to station retrograde in your 4th, some sort of breakthrough, some sort of emergence. It could absolutely connect with Pluto, who's retrograde in your 8th house and squaring those nodes in the 5th and the 11th. Something is electrically breaking through the atmosphere and emerging on your plate. Now, the Ace of Swords can be stressful. I just mentioned it's the best. It's the beginning of the suit is the best. It's from here that we begin to react to that breakthrough or that realization, and we tend to try to control it in some way, and that's what leads us to the 7. The 7 may be some indication of someone getting away with something on our end, someone who is making us try to get away with something, someone who is underselling or overselling something. Maybe we may be under or overselling ourselves. It's not necessarily the like someone is lying to you that the traditional descriptions of this card may be. It could be that we're lying to ourselves, but it may ultimately connect with not feeling like we belong. There can be some imposter syndrome themes in this card, maybe feeling suspicious of something going on, whether or not it's genuinely happening. There are questions here, and we're gonna peek into these dice to get a better idea. But It's interesting to see the Ace of Pentacles and the Ace of Swords together, and perhaps they're connected. Perhaps there's some sort of opportunity that then is connected to some sort of mental breakthrough or clarity or realization. Perhaps there is a desire to sweep someone off their feet or demonstrate something romantically or emotionally, and that leads to some sort of breakthrough or realization. And perhaps that puts us in a state of, oh no, I offered this gesture. Can I own up to it? Can I perform it? Can I actually sustain this? Is this something that I can do for real, the way that I proposed it? And let's remember that your chart ruler is entering its retrograde shadow this season and will station retrograde on the very first day of Virgo season. So there may be some reconfiguration here around what ideas break through and what their potential may be, as well as what attitudes they're connected to. This makes me think back to Pluto in your 8th, kind of sending these electric shocks around how we express ourselves from the 5th house and who's listening in the 11th house. Who's paying attention? How do I feel being this? Or how do I feel showing up as this? Does this feel real to me? Taurus, your 1st house. Okay. Well, I'm sorry, your 12th house. So there's possibly some 12th house themes here, where we see that that North Node has just finished up. You've just completed this sort of like evolution. And so perhaps there are some 12th house themes while Venus is retrograde in your 3rd house of the mind. Okay. So while Venus is retrograde in the 3rd house, there may be something within your mental landscape that becomes activated. And perhaps that sends you into some questions around, can I really do this? Or is this really for me? 2 makes me think about your 2nd house, and that, of course, is where your resources live, where you have your values. And perhaps this is connected to the Ace of Pentacles, where you're able to, maybe this is literally like a financial pentacle, all right? I can't say that's true for everyone, but perhaps there's some decision about, oh, I would like to lean into this potential. I would like to explore this for myself. And we have Neptune, who's hanging out in Pisces, and that's in your 10th house with Saturn. So maybe there's something about that legacy, that career, that reputation that you are thinking about in some serious way. Perhaps there's something in that 10th house, 4th house axis. We just described how Mercury is going to retrograde there. Perhaps there's something that wants to be unearthed in that 4th house space that kind of compels you to get really clear on something that you can't see clearly. That feels very 7 of Swords. I'm caught up in some perspective that is not allowing me to see what I really want. That's the entire suit of the swords, is I'm trying to suppress this. I'm trying to ignore this. I'm trying to push this away. And Neptune really confounds us, can really scare us, can really confuse us. But ultimately, while Mercury is in that retrograde, it will be dealing with that Neptune energy opposite it. So there may be something to explore here about who am I really and how do I feel like I present, and what about that do I want to own and acknowledge and accept and reconcile and then potentially change. All right, Gemini, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next season for our Virgo peek ahead. Hello, Cancer. Welcome to your Leo season preview. Okay, so when we are discussing Leo season, we are looking at the sun traveling through your 2nd house of personal resources, values, and skills. And that puts the full moon in Aquarius in your 8th house of shared resources. We have Venus retrograde also in your 2nd house. From there, she's ruling your 4th house of home, emotional body, family, and origin, as well as your 11th house of hopes and dreams for the future, grandchildren, friends, and communities. And we have the North Node in Aries hanging out in your 10th house of legacy, career, and reputation, with the South Node in Libra moving to that same 4th house that we just described of home, origin, and family. And they are squaring Pluto retrograde currently in your 7th house, finishing up those relationship themes on partnership, business, friend, lover, enemy. We have Mars in Virgo making its way through your 3rd house of local neighborhood, immediate environment, siblings, peers, and the mind. And Saturn in Pisces is hanging out in your 9th house of faraway travel, of higher learning, of religion and philosophy. And last but not least, we have Mercury moving through your 2nd as well and preparing for retrograde in your 3rd house of everything we just described with Mars, immediate environment, neighborhood, peers, and siblings in the mind. Okay, let's go ahead and pull some cards. And what we pull today, we'll be looking at through the lens of the Chariot, which is our card for the year, showing us where we are called to realign our conscious and unconscious motivations and instincts, as well as the Sun, which rules Leo and shows us our true inner light, our inner child, and helps us see ourselves clearly after moving through a period of fog. So let's go ahead and see what we got here. Okay. Ah, yes. Okay. Oh, wow. Multiple themes of rest showing up. Okay. Fun, fun. 2 4s, a major, and a court. Okay. So this is making me think about the full moon in your 8th house. That's my just where I'm going first and foremost. I'm also thinking about Venus retrograde ruling your 4th house of home and the emotional body. And so I love seeing these 4s kind of juxtaposed against each other. And kind of this major card energy, major arcana, and court card energy together. These 4s are pretty opposite, right? The 4 of Swords is a journey inward where we are going within to rest. The Suit of the Swords is not necessarily a pleasant one. It can be difficult. It can be fraught with all of the mental traps that we carry as humans: anxiety, overthinking, looking before we leap, all of these kind of like, And so in this 4, we are going into this space of reconciling and resting, as well as in this space we're blocking out kind of the static and the noise around us. So again, feels very 8th house, 4th house, thinking about how there's this lightning here on the outside, but this is a shelter that protects us from it. And so we are taking a respite from conflict perhaps, and this deepens in the chrysalis. The chrysalis is a deep pause. I'm thinking about Neptune, who is connected with this card, and thinking about how that's moving through your 9th house. You're kind of thinking about or reframing your philosophies, your ideas about the world and where you belong within it. And so there are similar themes here where we are traveling within for a pause. We are undergoing a deeper process. Now, what happens in the 4 is, again, within the Swords, a mental retreat, and the chrysalis card, which correlates with the Hanged One, the Hanged Man, however you see that in other decks. There was no hanging in my deck. The chrysalis connects with a much more spiritual retreat. So we have the mental component here and the spiritual element here, where we're going within to sense what our purpose is, as well as to undergo a deep transformation. I love thinking about the butterfly process, right? Like a caterpillar goes into a chrysalis and it completely dissolves itself down to its like skeletal foundation, upon which new information emerges to form this entirely new creature. So there is absolutely a going within, and again, thinking about those dark houses and what retreat might look like for you and what purpose it might serve. Again, I'm blocking out some of the static, I'm blocking out some of the noise that isn't about me or that is trying to distract me. And I'm also learning more deeply about what my spiritual sense of purpose is here and undergoing some sort of transformation. Queen of Wands and the Four of Wands is a much brighter, more vibrant story. And that's not to say that there's not anything rich in here. Let me not misspeak. Okay, there's so much rich that's happening in here. We need to go within. So let me reframe and say this is a much more external card. There is more possibility and like externalization that happens with these cards, although the Four is still a card of home and foundation. So we are looking at, and again, I'm thinking about Venus ruling that fourth house. We are thinking about what home looks like and how it holds space for our heart, how it holds space for our passion, how it grounds and supports that fire within us. And we need to ground and support that fire within us so that we can actively and consciously use it to create our reality, to create the world around us, and to create what we desire. Perhaps this going within portion of the reading is allowing for this externalization to occur, is allowing for this kind of fire energy to be awakened within you, right? So let's go ahead and roll these dice and get an idea of what else we need to know about this reading. But I can certainly see already where this portion deeply connects with the Chariot. We go within to contact those unconscious motives and instincts. In case we are steering ourselves in a direction that is not working out or not feeling right for us, these instincts may be guided by thought patterns and attitudes that we need to overhaul this period. So as we go into the chrysalis to allow for a spiritual reformation, that is motivated by us and allowing for these instincts to become realigned in a potent way. And to do that, we do need to cut out the noise around us. And the sun certainly connects with this fire energy, this wand energy regarding going within this shadow space, as I said in the beginning, to see what's genuinely possible in there, to get back to our true self, to get back in touch with who we really are and what that inner child really wants for us as adults, right? Okay, so this little dice rolled off screen, but we've got Taurus here, which is your, I'm thinking quickly, your 11th house of friends, community, the future, grandchildren. Grandchildren are our future, if we think about it, right? And so that is something, that's another space that Venus is ruling. And that actually, you know, in the beginning, I mentioned that Venus is ruling your 4th and 11th houses. And maybe those houses really connect with these spaces. This being a very 4th house, private, internal, emotional process. The 11th house space being very visible by other people and our friends. And so it might be that what Venus is trying to accomplish here is connected to what she's trying to bring forth for you out here. We see 3, and that's Virgo for you. We've got Mars moving through that 3rd house and ruling that north node in the 10th. So it's possible that we're kind of going within to transform something so that we can begin to move towards something powerful in the 10th house, right? For the next 18 months, you'll be bringing in lots of 10th house themes and activities if you dare. Okay, so you may need to go into this space to allow yourself to evolve into the one who dares. Okay, and we see Saturn, who's hanging out in your 9th house, and that certainly shows us some of those attitudes, some of those thoughts, some of those perspectives, philosophies that you might be separating from in some way. Saturn can chip away at things, can kind of like pull us out of things. And so Saturn might be pulling you away from some of those things in order to firm up what really wants to be there, what really wants to be strengthened and actually like fortified in that space. And so that may feel like that may feel like some of this chrysalis energy as well. You know, I mentioned Neptune hanging out in your 11th house, and ninth house, and Saturn's up there too. And so there's some feeling of, okay, I'm transforming some of my attitudes and perspectives about where I belong in the world. And Saturn is helping, is taking pause. Saturn's causing me to pause in that ninth house space with Neptune in order to really allow this process to unfold in a way that feels natural and genuine to me. Okay. Thank you so much, Cancer. Please let me know how this lands for you in the comments. If you enjoyed, please like, please share, please subscribe, and we'll see you here next month for our Virgo season preview. See you then.